It started with a dream and ended with a possession. At Paranormal M, we document the line between the mind and the supernatural. Subscribe and decide for yourself what's real. Phantom of the Bluffs. It was the summer of 2010. My friends and I were winding our way home from a late-night party. The sort of high school party where the music's, a bit too loud and parents were definitely away and everybody thought they were invincible. There were 3 of us that night. Me, Jay, and Kay. Each of us had brought our own cars, and at dawn, we decided to roll out together in a little convoy. Kay was up front, and I took the middle, and Jay trailed behind. The night before, Kay and I had taken ecstasy, and by morning, the sharpest edge of the high had worn off. We're still buzzing enough to think driving through the back roads at 5 a.m. was a perfectly normal idea. The route home cut through a series of bluffs just outside town, a winding 10-minute stretch where deer were usually the biggest hazard. The road was empty, sunlight already spilling over the hills. I was focused on Kay's car when I suddenly saw her, veer hard into the opposite lane. My stomach dropped, and then I saw why. Right in the middle of our lane stood an old man. Thin, almost skeletal, gray-haired with a battered shopping cart draped in a blue tarp. He just stood there, staring as we swerved past. My pulse spiked, because who the hell was that? Our town was tiny. Everyone knew everyone. We had, maybe 2 homeless guys at the time, and both of them familiar faces, and this wasn't either of them. When we reached town, we split off our separate ways, and I was still shaking, eager to text the others about the bizarre encounter. But before I could type, Jay messaged, "Why did you and Kay both swerve like that?" I fired back instantly, because the man in the middle of the road, maybe. Jay's reply froze me. There was no one there. The road's empty, dude. Kay chimed in almost immediately, describing exactly what I had seen. The gaunt old man, the gray clothes, the shopping cart with the blue tarp. We both insisted on it, and Jay insisted just as firmly that there was nothing. She hadn't seen anyone. Hadn't even noticed us swerving until it was already over. Now, maybe it was just the ecstasy messing with our heads, but back then, Kay and I often saw shadow figures when coming down from a high. This was different. This wasn't some vague blur on the corner of your eye. It was a man in full detail, clothes, cart and all. We both saw the same thing, exactly the same way. The Bluffs had their share of tragedies. Old stories about cars plunging into the canyon back in the 50s, but never pedestrians. Never a man with a cart. To this day, I don't know if we dodged a hallucination or a ghost. The House That Watches. My partner and I bought our first home in February of 2024. It's not ancient, it's built in 1981. But from the very first week, it felt unsettled. Things happen here that make no sense, especially in the kitchen and the garage. Windows slide open on their own, and doors shift even when the air is still. Our kitchen light, one of those dimmable ones, it sometimes surges to blinding brightness without anybody touching the switch. The microwave occasionally wakes us up at 3 a.m. beeping and flashing with a system fault across the screen. And it's almost always after sunset. Last week, the kitchen light snapped from a faint glow to full force so violently that we both flinched. A second later, our dog bolted upstairs and refused to come back down. Our cat, usually fearless, has started lingering around the front door every night, as though waiting for us to let him escape. The energy in the kitchen is wrong. Even when I just want a glass of water, I hesitate. Sometimes I'd rather stay thirsty. When we sleep, we leave the bedroom door slightly ajar. Too many nights I've seen what looks like a figure leaning in through the crack, only to vanish when I focus on it. One night in March, our bedroom window flew open while we were asleep. Outside, it was negative 18 degrees centigrade. Guests have casually remarked that they thought they saw somebody crossing the highway or standing near the entryway, though we've never really told them what's been happening. And then there's us, both of us. Ever since moving here, a heavy fog has settled over our moods. It didn't hit immediately, but after a couple of months, the weight crept in, and I felt drained every morning, no matter how long I would sleep. Partner says the same. It's as if the house itself feeds on our rest. The Sealed Vault. When I was about 16, must have been 12 years ago, I joined a summer camp in northern Spain. They organized overnight hikes for teenagers. That's where we'd sleep out under the stars in a meadow. The spot was beautiful, right beside a stream that fed into a small waterfall with woods sort of hemming us in on every side. One evening, while wandering with a few new friends, we stumbled upon something strange, a forgotten cemetery. It wasn't large, and it was barely a dozen graves surrounded by a rusted wrought iron fence. The stones were old and weather-worn, all from the 1800s. What unsettled me most was that half of them were children's graves, tiny markers and names nearly erased. In the center stood a crypt, sealed with bricks where the door should have been. Naturally, one of the boys thought it hilarious to rap his knuckles on it. "Anybody home in there?" And he laughed. A few seconds later, we all heard him. 3 sharp knocks answering from inside. We circled the vault, convinced it had been a prank, but there was no one hiding, only the echo of stone. Then the knocking came again, harder this time and faster, as if something inside was desperate to get out. I don't think I've ever run so fast in my life. None of us went near that meadow again, and that night, every single one of us lay awake, staring at the dark. Till this day, I wonder, why was the vault bricked shut? The Visitor Who Never Knocks. I've dealt with sleep paralysis for years, but ever since moving into this house, it's almost like the episodes follow a script. I wake up, frozen on my back, and then I hear the creak of my bedroom door opening. Somebody steps in, walks across the room, and without a word slips into bed beside me. After a while, they get back up, leave, and pull the door shut behind them. The first time it happened, I was convinced somebody had broken in, but the locks were untouched. Every door still bolted, and besides my 2 dogs, who in my sleep curled at my feet, they didn't even stir once. If they were real, they would have raised hell, so I told myself it was just another cruel trick of sleep paralysis. But once, after I drifted back to sleep, I dreamed I finally caught the intruder. I chased the figure down the hallway all the way to the basement door where the entrance to the crawl space is. And when I yanked it open, there stood an old woman, smiling like she'd been waiting for me. "You forgot to lock it again," she whispered. I woke with my heart pounding because, as it turned out, that basement door really had been left unlocked. And the strangest episode came only a few nights ago. For the first time, I wasn't on my back, I was lying on my side with my arms stretched out. I jolted awake when I felt a hand gripping mine. This time I could actually move, and I watched fully conscious as the shadowy figure rose from the floor beside my bed, walked out through the door. My dog still didn't wake, not even a twitch. I leapt up with my adrenaline surging, tore through the house with my pistol. Every window was latched and every lock in place. Nothing was disturbed. Nothing except for the fact that this was the first time it touched me. The silent escort. Me, a 35-year-old female, my best friend, a 36-year-old female. We went for what was supposed to be a regular Sunday walk in the forest. Stretch our legs, clear the brain fog, and complain about work. Totally normal, except it wasn't. We'd been on the trail maybe 15 minutes when I noticed movement behind us. A buck, antlers and all, was just standing there perfectly still watching us. Not spooked, not grazing, just staring. I thought, oh cool, a free nature documentary. But then it started walking after us, like slow with measured steps. Never closing the gap, never letting it widen either. Every time we turned around, it froze like some creepy game of red light, green light. And then, because of course one deer isn't weird enough, a second appeared from the trees, then a third. By the time we reached the fork in the trail, there were 6 of them. 6 deer all in this eerie half-circle shadowing us, heads up, ears twitching, eyes fixed. My friend whispered, "Feels like they're hurting us." And honestly, it sort of did feel like that. They didn't stop until we reached the parking lot. One even stood at the edge of the woods with broad shoulders against the dark, just watching as we unlocked the car. I swear it didn't look away until the engine started, and we can't shake it. Were they protecting something deeper in the woods, or were we trespassing somewhere we shouldn't be? It felt like less of a coincidence and more like a warning. The Girl in the Mirrors. This happened about 1.5 years ago, and I share an apartment with my sister, though she's usually off traveling. So I often end up living alone. The building itself is old, and the kind that's been modernized in strange ways. For reasons I'll never really understand, the landlord decided to install mirrors everywhere. Big, heavy mirrors. There's one in every bedroom and 2 stacked awkwardly in the hallway. Even a cracked one above the kitchen counter. Feels like an apartment and, well, rather less like an apartment and more like a funhouse. But my sister left on a trip 6 months ago. I started noticing these odd things. A mug I swore I'd left on the table was suddenly in the sink. A little porcelain figure sort of turned to the face, well, I'm screwing this up badly, turned to face the wall. A framed photo slid off of its nail as I walked past it. I shrugged and put things back where they belonged and went on with my life. Once winter rolled in, I kept the apartment warm by closing off unused rooms. My sister's bedroom, the bathroom, then heading to bed, and that night I dreamed I was in the kitchen. I heard sobbing behind my sister's door. It wasn't her voice, I just knew it belonged to another girl. I woke up to find my closet door, one I'd latched tightly before sleeping, wide open. I'm not easily rattled by ghost stories, so the next morning I half joked out loud, "Alright, you can stay, but don't mess with my stuff." And after that, I started calling her Mirror Roomie. Whenever I lost my keys or couldn't find my phone, I muttered, "Roomie, where'd you put it this time?" It became a running gag between me and the empty apartment. The dreams, though, they got stranger. I'd see an old rotary phone ringing and feel dread about answering. Or I would sense someone standing by my bed, but never actually seeing their face. The few times I woke convinced that there was somebody sleeping next to me. The final dream was the worst. I was in my room. It was late at night, and in the mirror I saw a blur of white. A dress moving fast. I chased it through the hallway until I reached the living room. And there, standing perfectly still, was a girl in a bright white dress. She didn't move, and my heart was pounding, but I walked closer and tapped her shoulder, expecting her to whirl around, and she didn't. I said, "This isn't your place anymore. Let's get you home." Guided her toward the front door, but the moment I touched the doorknob, I woke up. When my sister finally returned, her window was inexplicably wide open, though she swore she hadn't touched it. I told her everything, calm as ever, and she spoke to the empty room. "This is our apartment now. You need to respect that." And just like that, the disturbances stopped. No more moved objects, no more dreams. Even when I stayed alone, the mirror stayed quiet. Echoes at the ship's edge. For as long as I can remember, I've been weirdly tuned into the energy of places. Some rooms feel light and harmless, while others hit me like walking into a wall. Thick and heavy and impossible to ignore. Usually the shift is abrupt, like a door slamming shut behind me. A couple of weeks ago, I finally visited the RMS Queen Mary. I was thrilled, and I was in a great mood with good company. Plenty of laughs. Most of the ship carried that eerie museum-like heaviness I expected, but nothing alarming. Then our guide steered us into a dimly lit lounge near the forward section, and that's when things turned strange. It wasn't fear I felt, it was sorrow. Not my own, but as if my body suddenly remembered a tragedy my mind knew nothing about. My chest sank and my throat tightened, and it was hard to breathe, yet mentally I was fine. I live with anxiety and depression, so I know my usual patterns. But this was different. It felt borrowed, like grief that didn't belong to me. The guide then explained this was the very part of the ship where the Queen Mary collided with another vessel, sending hundreds of men to their deaths. And as we moved closer to the bow, the pressure in the air only deepened. My jaw shook uncontrollably, my eyes blurred with tears, and my hand trembled even though my thoughts were perfectly clear. It was as if my body was carrying the weight of ghosts. And then, just as suddenly, it ended. I stepped out of that space and the heaviness lifted, and sunshine through a cloud and normal again. I've always been told I'm overly sensitive, maybe even empathetic, but this was unlike anything I've ever experienced. And I've sensed anger in a room before, or the prickling like you're being watched kind of presence. But this was raw and physical sorrow. So I have to wonder, can a place hold on to grief, and if so, did I stumble into the echo of all of that loss? The girl with the green eyes. Never posted here before, but my family's completely at a loss. For the past 5 years, there's been a presence in our home. We call her the little girl, though what she is doesn't really feel like a child. It started with my brother's baby monitor when he was just a toddler, and he's almost 5 now. We'd hear her voice whispering through the static, carrying conversations none of us were a part of. My brother says that she plays with him, but the stories don't add up. In his upstairs room, he tells us that they're mean to me, and she says I should leave. But downstairs, he insists that they're nice and they play with me. Last week he mentioned she joined him in a dream. Curious, I asked what she looked like. He hesitated and then said that she doesn't have hair, she's all black and her eyes are green. He spread his fingers wide across his face and stretched his eyes open until they looked almost too big. And her neighbors once admitted that she'd been in their house too, but after a cleansing ritual, she vanished from their lives. We weren't so lucky, and somehow she stayed behind with us. Lately, my brother has formed a strange attachment to a porcelain doll that we bought at a flea market months ago. He won't let my parents throw it away. And when she's around, little things start happening, like lights flickering and pillows sort of turning up in the wrong rooms and her dog barking at corners of empty walls. One night, a can of air freshener launched itself at my dad, and we even bought an EMF reader. Certain spots in the house spike up into the 130s and 140s. Every time we test, it's the same. The numbers climb only in the spaces where my brother says she stands. He can't quite describe her as a real person, just a shadow with green eyes. We've tried searching online for stories that match hers, but nothing comes up. My parents are desperate enough now that they're planning a full cleansing of the house. I do not know what's going to happen, but I do know one thing. She isn't leaving on her own. Whispers in the wrong places. I've had 3 run-ins with something I can't explain. Paranormal, maybe skinwalker, maybe worse. I don't think it's random. It doesn't haunt me exactly, but it sticks in my head like a splinter. Here's what went down. Encounter 1. I was walking back one night. I was going through the housing complex where I used to stay in foster care. The place was all cracked pavement with broken lights and kind of quiet. Kind of feels like it's listening. A stray dog trotted behind me, thin and scrappy, and I slowed thinking to pet it. But the instant I turned, my whole body just locked like my nervous system flipped a breaker. I couldn't even breathe and every cell screamed run, so I just bolted and the dog kept pace, trotting to the porch as I fumbled with my keys. Once I got inside, it sat by the steps. Hours later, I heard it scratching at the siding and just whining under my bedroom window until morning. Encounter 2. Camping with my ex, and the night was calm. We're about to roast marshmallows when he froze and his eyes locked past me. Air went cold like we'd opened a freezer door. A bear stood just beyond the firelight. We dove into the RV and slammed the door shut. He whispered that it didn't look right and said the bear's face was missing, like nothing was there, and next morning no tracks, no overturned food, not even a paw print. Worse still, his mom jolted awake in the night screaming, convinced she dreamed we were dead in the woods. Encounter 3. Same ex, different trip. We wandered into this clearing near the dunes. A place that should have felt open but felt trapped. 6 deer stood in the distance. Statuesque, not grazing, just staring. And in the middle of them, a raccoon sat upright watching too. Highway noise nearby vanished, and even the waves went mute. No sounds at all, just eyes, and we backed out fast. On the trail back, there was a pile of trash and fresh animal bones scattered across the sand. I swear they weren't there when we first walked through. The visitor in the doorway. Middle of the night, I rolled over trying to find a cooler spot on the sheets, drifting toward my husband's side of the bed. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught something at the doorway, and I blinked thinking it was a trick of the dark. But no, the figure didn't disappear. Someone was standing there. It wasn't a blur of shadow like when your eyes play tricks, because it had a shape. A man, tall and still, leaning against the frame as if he'd been waiting. A long coat draped down almost to the floor. Instead of a hat this time, I swear I saw a hood pulled low. And the strangest part is 2 glowing eyes. Not red, but pale and sickly yellow, watching me like embers that refused to die out. I whispered, nudging my husband, telling him somebody was in the room. He didn't stir and didn't move an inch, and just kept breathing steady like he was locked in sleep too deep to break. The figure didn't shift, it didn't speak, it just stared. And the unsettling part wasn't fear. My heart didn't pound and I didn't scream. I only felt a heavy unease, like the air was too thick, as though it had come for me, and only me. Not from my husband, not from my child down the hall, just me. And at some point, without deciding to, I closed my eyes and drifted back to sleep. When the morning came, I told my husband, and he just looked at me and said, "You know, people talk about shadow visitors, and they say they come at night. I've never heard of such stories before, so if this was my imagination, it wasn't mine." The scent that walked beside me. When I was about 6, my great-grandmother passed away, and the truth is, I don't remember much of her, only that she carried a scent that was unlike anyone else's. It wasn't perfume exactly, but a mix of lavender soap and something older. Something worn into her skin. Kind of brutal, but okay. Years later, during a move, I opened a cedar chest filled with her scarves and her handkerchiefs. That same scent rushed out and hit me so hard I cried, and felt like she had stepped out into the room just for a second. I sealed the scarves in a canvas bag, almost like I was trapping the memory itself, and this part will matter later. Last week, during my usual late-night walk, I suddenly caught that smell again. Came out of nowhere, wrapping around me in the dark, and my chest tightened and I thought I might collapse. For 2 blocks, it clung to me like invisible company. But when I reached the streetlight outside the pharmacy, it vanished. Nothing else I've ever known has smelled like her, and I rushed home and told my mom. We went straight for the bag of scarves. The drawstring had somehow come loose, and the scent was faint and almost gone. My mom swore she could still detect it, but to me it was empty air. The next night it returned, same place, same 2 blocks. Then gone at the pharmacy. And after that, nothing but silence. Just me in the night again. I can't explain it, and I kept wondering if she was watching me. Especially now, since I was recently diagnosed with a chronic illness. My doctor warns me about pushing too hard during humid nights. Yet those were the nights I walked anyway. Maybe the scent was her way of keeping me company, or warning me, or both. I don't know, I just wanted to share this in case somebody else had a similar moment like that. Where a loved one finds their way back, not in a body, not in a vision, but in the strange persistence of a smell that belongs only to them. She wasn't in my life for long, but her presence lingers. Sometimes on the wind, and sometimes in memory, and always in me. The Faceless Visitor. I swear I left my body once. I'm 23 now, and it wasn't a dream. I remember it as clear as daylight. I must have been around 9 years old, and it was late at night, and I was just snacking on sour gummies while watching Full House on my little TV. My brother was asleep on the floor, my sister in her bed, both completely out. My room was arranged kind of oddly. The door was on the far end of the wall, and my bed was pushed right up against the same wall. Just not all the way in the corner. The TV sat on a rickety dresser straight across from me. The glow from the screen spilled into the hallway, just enough to outline the first few feet, while the rest of the hall dissolved into pitch blackness. Then it happened. My body froze like sleep paralysis, but worse. My eyes slammed shut and I couldn't move them. I couldn't twitch a finger and I couldn't breathe. Not one single inhale. My brain, though wide awake, registered everything in terrifying clarity. And then suddenly I wasn't in bed anymore. I was standing right at my doorway, staring into the dark hallway. I tried to turn around to see my body still lying there, but it was like somebody had sealed that view off for me. Oddly, I didn't panic, I just accepted it. And that's when I noticed movement. In the far end of the hallway, a figure stumbled toward me. And I knew instantly it was me, or rather a version of me. Same height, same school uniform, a pale button-up shirt with a faint stain near the collar. Maybe pants creased from too many wears, but this me was wrong. Its face was nothing, just a smooth shadow where my eyes and mouth should have been. Its body lurched forward in a jerky, broken motion, like a puppet with its strings cut. And it got closer. Closer for the first 3 or 4 seconds. I stared at this faceless, limping version of myself walking straight toward the doorway. And then snap, I was back in my own body. My lungs burst open with a desperate gasp like I'd been underwater for too long. The rush of oxygen hit so hard it scared me more than the shadow did. And at the time, I hadn't been afraid of what I saw, but the second I woke in my body again, I shook with terror. Never forgotten it. Felt more than real life, and even now, thinking about it makes me shiver. I don't know what that thing was and why it looked like me, why I wasn't allowed to look back at my body, but I do know this. I never want to see that faceless version of myself again. The house that wouldn't let go. Back in 2020, I made this kind of mistake you only make once. A woman I knew more of a passing acquaintance than a friend just had left rehab. I let her crash at my place for a while, and I told myself I was doing a good thing. One evening, I'm stirring a pot of pasta sauce in the kitchen, the smell of garlic heavy in the air. She was in the living room with her phone pressed to her ear, and it went too quiet. I turned around and she wasn't breathing. Her skin had taken on this awful grayish blue like wet concrete. The phone was still clenched in her hand and her boyfriend's voice kind of crackling from the speaker. He didn't panic. He told me to check her bag and there was a Narcan spray inside. My hand shook, but I did what he said and she came back to life with a gasp. It was so sharp it cut the room in half. I thought that was the end of it. But a few days later I asked her to leave, and that night my world shifted. I woke in the dark with the pressure around my throat like invisible hands pressing down. My limbs wouldn't move and I tried to scream but couldn't, and when I finally forced myself awake, my chest heaving, I flicked on the closet light like a child terrified of shadows. For the first time in years, I was afraid of the dark. Then the impossible happened. All 3 toilets in my house flushed at once. The sound thundered through the silence. Cut off the water supply just to calm myself down. And in the morning, I found 2 bruises on my neck, oval-shaped like thumbprints. I reached out to the girl just to see if she was alive, but got no reply. Days passed with silence, and my cat, who always loved curling up in the armchair where she had overdosed, refused to go near it anymore. He hissed at it once and then bolted. Soon the house itself felt hostile. I'd be cooking, minding my own business, and suddenly I'd feel a sweep of air behind me. Once I turned around and saw a shadow slide from ceiling to floor and vanish into the bathroom against all reason, and I just followed it. Something told me to check the trash, and buried inside was a small packet of powder stamped with a red skull and crossbones. It reeked of chemicals, sharp and bitter. And then came the whisper, maybe my own thoughts, maybe not, urging me to taste it. I don't touch drugs and never have. I flush it down the toilet with my hands trembling. After that, the pipes wouldn't stop groaning and toilets ran endlessly as if the house itself was leaking. When my daughter came to visit, I said nothing, but after an hour she frowned and said, "I don't like the energy here." Gave the armchair away for free on Craigslist. The moment it left, the air felt lighter and almost normal. But only almost, because I moved into a new place hoping to start fresh. And for a while it worked, till the nightmares followed me. My cat would sit in my bedroom staring at the corner above the door and blinking. And one night I slipped into a lucid dream so vivid I swore I was awake. My cats were yowling under the bed, but when I bent down to look, it wasn't them. A figure was crouched there, a girl with stringy black hair and eyes bulging and a mouth that stretched impossibly wide as she hissed. She looked like something dredged out of a nightmare forum on the internet, and I woke up screaming. And it's been years since. I haven't been the same. Anxiety has dug its claws into me, and my luck has soured beyond reason. People have even told me flat out that you're cursed, and sometimes I believe them. I never asked for any of this, but it feels like something asked for me. The Shattered Night at Grandma's. So last week, my mom sent me a bunch of photos from my grandmother's house, and honestly, they looked like a tornado had run through the place. Lamps tipped over, glass cracked, and bookshelves emptied like somebody had been shaking the walls. At first, I thought maybe a raccoon or something broke in, but then came the call. And this all went down around 2:45 in the morning, according to my uncle who was there. Things started flying off on their own. The kitchen trash can rolled across the floor and chairs tipped over like dominoes. And even after they set them back upright, boom, they fell again. Medicine bottles popped open, silverware spilled into the tile. Then they stepped into the garage. The door was sliding up and down like it was alive. They dialed the cops, of course, but when officers showed up, there was nobody inside. Every door was locked from the inside. My dad later noticed that a strip of siding had peeled off near the back porch, right outside the worst-hit room. And the eerie part was everybody swore they heard faint knocking upstairs, but when they went to go check, the whole floor was empty. And the detail that still makes my stomach twist. Inside my grandma's wallet was a family photo, and it was torn nearly in half. It was a picture of me, not anyone else, just me. And I live almost 2 hours away, and to this day, none of us have a real explanation for what happened in that house. The Fire on Willow Road. Growing up in the backwoods of the South, my friends and I had a knack for drifting toward the places we were told to avoid. And there was one in particular, a forgotten stretch called Willow Road. It held a weather-beaten church, a handful of collapsed barns, and a house that none of us ever dared step inside. That house sat crooked on its foundation, its porch splintered and windows black as if scorched. But when the wind would blow through, the place seemed like it was breathing. We'd hang around there in the sticky afternoons, kicking up dust, tossing bottle caps, and daring each other to walk closer. But as sure as the sun began to sink, we'd scatter back home before the shadows grew long. One evening, though, we lingered, and the air was heavy, and it was orange with sunset. We stuck together, not bold enough to split off like usual as we crept past the house, but this thing made us stop cold, because on the porch, in the dim light, a figure sat stiff as stone. A woman, or what we thought was a woman, in a rocking chair that didn't rock. And then out of nowhere, a sudden flare of fire blazed inside the house, gone in an instant. Whether it was real or some sort of trick of our fear, I'll never know. We bolted like hellhounds were after us. The next day, one of our crew didn't show up to school. When we finally found him, he looked hollowed out and pale. He swore he was fine, just helping this old man cut timber. But when we pressed him, he kind of cracked. He told us of a dream, or maybe a nightmare, where the same old woman appeared in rags, holding a human skull, tossing it into a pit of fire. Then she turned and pointed at him, and he saw us too, watching from a void of pitch darkness. And that image burned into us. Never went back to Willow Road. Weeks later, while gassing up our bikes at the station, some gray-bearded local overheard us whispering about the place. He spat and told us a story. 30 years ago, A jealous husband found out his wife was stepping out on him, and in his rage he set fire to their home. Her inside of it. Folks said she didn't die quick and that she screamed for hours, and we didn't need to hear the rest. The pieces, the woman, the fire, the dread, they all fit too well. Years down the line, after I'd moved to Birmingham, caught wind of something else. A girl had shot her boyfriend dead in the same area. Close enough to call it the house's shadow. My parents whispered about it all at breakfast, but when I searched later, there wasn't a trace of it in the papers. No record, no headline, just silence, like the South itself had swallowed the memory whole. Even now, grown and living far away, I can't shake Willow Road. The house sits in my head like a scar, and my buddy's dream, the fire, the woman, they feel like memories, and, well, almost less like memories and more like warnings. Some places I've learned don't just hold history, they hold you, and Willow Road has been holding me ever since. The visitor in the hallway. Let's rewind a bit. Early 2000s. Somewhere between 10 and 12, living out in the Pennsylvania countryside with my mom. Not only my mom, but my older brother, nearly a decade older than me. 3 cats too, and technically 4, but one of them preferred to act like a ghost anyway. The house was brand new, built in 2002. We were the very first ones to move in, and it was cozy and modern and perfectly ordinary. Except it wasn't. See, I could never sleep in my own room. Something about it felt wrong. Not scary exactly, but like a smile that lingers a little too long. So most nights I'd crash in the master bedroom with my mom, each of us in our own bed. The room was connected to a walk-in closet, and this part matters. A trap door to the attic that no one's ever touched. It's one of those pretend it doesn't exist places. One night, Mom and I turned in while my brother and his friends stayed up playing Halo downstairs. The sound carried easily, and it was a small house, so I could hear their trash talking echoing faintly. Mom fell asleep quickly, snoring lightly, while I lay awake staring at the ceiling. And that's when I heard it. The hallway floorboards groaning, one after another, closer and closer. Not unusual at first, because somebody heading to the bathroom was maybe happening, But the steps didn't stop. They came right up to our door, and the knob rattled. And the weird part is I could still hear all 3 guys laughing downstairs. No one should have been at that door, and my stomach dropped. I squeezed my eyes shut, rolled my face against the wall, and tried to look convincingly asleep. The knob turned, and the door creaked open. Something stepped in. The sound wasn't like regular footsteps, it was more like the crinkle of paper bags pressed against hardwood. It walked straight between my bed and my mom's, and I could feel it. The air got heavy, and I swear it looked at her first, and then stopped right behind me. And then it leaned down, and I felt a breath in my ear, followed by 2 sharp inhales, like it was sniffing me. My whole body shook, but I didn't move. And then just as suddenly, it walked out, closing the door behind it. I bolted upright and locked the door and sat there trembling until sunrise. When I finally drifted off, I was woken a few hours later by my mom's scream. One of the cats, my cat, the clingy one, had bolted into the room as soon as she opened the door and kind of peed right at my bed. She had never done that before, and she's never did it again. After that, we locked the doors every single night. And almost every night, I'd still hear the floorboards creak outside and the knob testing our lock. Sometimes it gave up quick, and sometimes it lingered, pacing back toward the closet. And that first lock night, it even rattled the door so violently I thought the frame would crack. But over time, it got quieter and almost patient. My mom never noticed a thing, and she's the kind of sleeper who could snooze through an earthquake. My brother didn't believe me either until years later when I just kind of brought it up again, and even he admitted the house never sat right with him. The kicker is, when we eventually moved just a year or so later into a house that people claimed was haunted, there was nothing. Dead silence. I even slept in the attic there just to test fate. No footsteps, no doorknobs, no nothing. Whatever it was, it stayed behind in that brand new quote-unquote perfect house. Funny enough, that place has chewed through 3 more owners since we left. Sometimes I think about going back just to see it. Then I remember the sound of plastic feet in the dark and, I think I'll pass. The Vanishing Hour. This might sound unbelievable, but it happened the day before yesterday, on my 17th birthday of all days. My friend, a 17-year-old male, and I had gone out of town for a mountain bike race. These weekends always run the same way. Saturdays practice, Sundays the real deal. And after our practice runs, we figured ice cream would be a good victory lap. I was halfway through a chocolate cone when I kind of heard nature calling. The shop didn't have a restroom, so I told my friend I'd check the hotel next door. He tagged along, and it was around 6 p.m. and sun just started to fade. The lobby was wrong the moment we stepped into it. The air smelled of mildew and old upholstery, like a place sealed off too long. Not a soul in sight, no receptionist, no guests. Just silence broken by 2 things: the uneven buzz of the fluorescent lights and the golden waving cat statue at the counter. Its paw clicked up and down, echoing through the emptiness, and that sound got underneath my skin. Told my friend I'd find the bathroom myself. He sank into the couch near the door, scrolling his phone, and I followed a flickering restroom sign down the hallway. But at the end, there weren't any bathrooms, just an empty ballroom, and it looked like a party had been staged and then kind of erased mid-scene. Stands and cables and an abandoned mic sat on stage, humming faintly, even though no speakers were visible, at least to me. Colored lights splashed across the dance floor, but there were no bulbs, no projectors, and the disco ball hung motionless, scattering reflections that seemed disconnected from reality. I turned to leave, but another doorway caught my eye. An Indian restaurant, or what used to be one. The red carpet crunched like brittle paper underneath my sneakers. The neon signs kind of sputtered over the bar, and dust drifted through the air, glowing golden in the dim light. Then came the music, warped, faint, but like a sitar playing on a broken record player. The booths lined the walls, but the center was bare and empty. And that's when I noticed a glowing sign that I swear I hadn't seen there before. Restrooms this way. Inside the restroom was pitiful. Dim bulb, cracked mirror, rusted paper towel dispenser. I washed my hands, shoved the door open, and the world changed. Suddenly the smell of curry hit me, fresh and hot, and voices filled the air, and laughter and clinking plates and forks against porcelain. I froze, and the dead restaurant I'd walked into was gone. Families filled the booths, and waiters darted between tables that hadn't been there before. Children laughed over naan, and the bar bustled with noise and men talking over one another and beers foaming in their hands. Bright light filled every corner. My chest tightened. Back into the hallway, heard pounding, and I looked again, and everything was alive, warm. No dust, no silence. Then my phone buzzed. A text from my friend. "Dude, where are you? I'm seriously about to leave." I ran back when I stepped into the lobby. The outside world had shifted. It was pitch black beyond the glass doors. My friend was still by the couch, but he looked pale and trembling. "Where the hell did you go?" he stammered. "I called you like 10 times, and you didn't answer. I went in there, and you weren't anywhere. You just vanished." Pulled out my phone, and it was nearly 9 p.m., and I swear I'd been gone maybe 10 minutes. And the lobby, it was suddenly alive too, the TV blaring news and a clerk at the desk smiling. Travelers with rolling suitcases crossing behind us like nothing was strange. We left without a word. As I glanced back through the glass doors, my stomach flipped. The golden waving cat was gone, and That night, lying in bed in our own hotel, I couldn't shake it. The smell of curry clung to my nose, and the warped music hummed in my ears, and the sound of clinking plates replayed in my head. I don't know where I went or how I almost lost 3 hours, but I do know this: I never step into an empty hotel lobby again. The heavy room. I've never thought of myself as somebody who's sensitive to energy or spiritual atmospheres. Honestly, I usually roll my eyes when people talk about that stuff. I grew up in a creaky old house, sure, and I did love antique shops and even walked through abandoned hospitals without ever feeling anything beyond a curiosity. But there was this one time I stopped by a very old bookshop in a neighboring town, a place I'd visited a handful of times before, and there's an upstairs section filled with dusty shelves and uneven wooden floors. I went up there alone, as I usually do, and then suddenly this wave of unease hit me. Not fear exactly, but that strange, irrational kind of pressure in your chest that just says you shouldn't be here. I told myself I was imagining it. I don't believe in bad vibes and never have, but the feeling didn't go away. My pulse kicked up and my stomach dropped, and I just muttered, "Yeah, nope." Walked straight back down the stairs, and it really wasn't that dramatic. Just an urgent need to leave, as if I'd overstayed in a place that didn't want me. It reminded me of something that happened years earlier. My mom was helping with an estate sale at this big, elegant house. Most of the rooms were perfectly ordinary, even beautiful. But near the front entrance, there was one small parlor that felt different. Heavy, as if the air was thicker in there than anywhere else. I couldn't shake it, and I didn't see anything. I didn't hear anything. Just the weight of it pressing on me until I stepped out. And I'm still a skeptic, and I don't believe in ghosts, and I don't go hunting for paranormal stories, but every once in a while, something about a place feels undeniably off, and I can't explain why. The man at the glass doors. I always assumed the whole thing began when I was grown, but the truth is, it was about dreams. Dreams I used to have and haven't had in years. Back then, I would smoke myself numb before bed just to shut them off, and I hated them. I mean, I really hated them. About 7 years ago, I had to move back into my parents' house for a while. My dad was sick with cancer, and my mom was slipping further into dementia. It was brutal. I worked days and helped them through the nights, and the place was my old childhood home, but I didn't even have a bed anymore. So I would crash on the sofa in the living room. Across from that couch were these tall sliding glass doors that opened to the backyard, and I'd pass out staring right through them. And that's when the dream started repeating. Every month or two, I'd see men out there, wandering in the dark, headlights flicking on and cars rolling across the lawn. In the dream, I'd launch myself off the couch, ready to throw down. But later, it stopped being groups of men and became just one figure, an old man waiting at the doors in daylight. I had those dreams until shortly after Mom passed in 2022. Dad was already gone by then. My last dream ended with me finally grabbing the man and realizing it was me. Since then, nothing. Not a single dream like that. Getting married and told my fiancée about it, and she agreed it was creepy as hell. But talking about it stirred up something older. Dreams I used to have when I was a kid, like 8 or 9 years old maybe. And even now, thinking about it makes me shiver. Back then, I'd lie in bed staring out my window. Our house wasn't at the corner of the block, and I swore there was something waiting at the streetlight. Like a figure pitch black, and I called it the witch. Some nights I don't know if I was awake or dreaming, but I'd sneak downstairs and go inside to chase it. Just like with the old man years later when I was little. Fight or flight wasn't even the debate, I was always in the fight. But every time I reached that corner, there was nothing, just silence. Then I climbed back upstairs to bed, heart pounding, unsure if I'd been dreaming the whole thing. And even now, I still don't know. The girl who wouldn't wait. I've dealt with sleep paralysis for years, but there's two particular nights that still make my stomach drop whenever I think about them. This is going to sound ridiculous, but around 3 years ago, I had an imaginary boyfriend. I was a miserable teenager who'd never been kissed, never held anyone's hand, never even been on a date, so I invented one. Every time life got too sharp, I pictured him there, cracking jokes and ruffling my hair and squeezing my hand like it was the most natural thing in the world. But after months of leaning on that made-up comfort, something shifted. One night, that's when I felt it, like a freezing hand clutching my forearm, tightening me like it was trying to haul me out of bed. And with its other hand, it shook the mattress so hard I thought the legs would splinter, and God help me, I heard his voice. A voice that had only ever lived in my head. "Come on, open your eyes," he teased, his tone light but urgent. "Don't leave me waiting, get up." He kept pulling, kept rattling the bed, and his playful pleading melting into frantic desperation. Something in me, some animal instinct, refused to look, and I climbed my eyes shut until the shaking stopped and the world blurred into sleep. I woke in the morning. I was drenched in sweat and gasping for air. And a few nights later, it happened again. Except this time, the voice wasn't his. It was his younger brother's, and I said, "Wake up, Dad's gonna be furious if you don't get up." And he snapped, yanking me by the shoulders while the invisible hands tore at my wrist. The voice grew louder and sharper until it was nearly screaming into my ear, and I did what I did before. I refused. I kept my eyes locked shut until sleep dragged me down. Till this day, I can't explain how something I created in my own head, someone who never existed, managed to touch me and to speak with a voice that wasn't mine. Worst of all, I still don't know if he's waiting for me to finally open my eyes. The breath in the dark. 1:32, give or take. Got bored, turned off my laptop, rolled onto my bed, flattened my back, eyes shut. Room was silent, just the usual hum of the night. Mind starts drifting, half dreaming, letting random thoughts string themselves together. Then out of nowhere, a voice cuts clean through everything, deep and gravelly and wet with air, and it says, "Hey." I don't use that name much. Most people call me by my shorter version. But whatever, doesn't matter. What matters is that I froze, didn't move a muscle, and just snapped my eyes open. First thought is my sister was messing around with me. Glanced toward the door and there was nothing, still darkness. But I hear it, the sound of footsteps circling my bed slow and deliberately. If someone left, the hallway light would spill in, but it didn't. So I reach around, kind of blindly, fingers brushing the sheets, and grab the remote and flick the TV back on. The screen glow hits my walls, and I sit up and I'm shaking. And I don't shake easily. Not from sounds, not from shadows, but my hands were trembling like I'd been out in the cold for too long. Went to my parents' room, muttered what happened, and they shrugged and told me to sleep, which is pretty typical. Thing is I do hear stuff now and then, but this wasn't the usual static in my head. This was different, distinct. That voice had weight, like it came from inside the floor, a belly rumble mixed with breath. Low frequency enough to vibrate the air, and the breathing didn't stop when the voice did. It kept going, alongside the footsteps, which makes me think maybe it wasn't just one. And honestly, if this turns out to be paranormal, I wouldn't even be surprised at this point. The Hat Man in the hallway. Ever since my grandmother passed, the air in my house hasn't felt normal, and I've always been a little too sensitive to things that aren't there, but lately, it's crossed the line from unsettling to unbearable. It usually begins between 1:30 and 3:30. I'll be lying in bed scrolling on my phone, and something shifts in my peripheral vision. At first, I blamed it on lack of sleep, but the images are too sharp and too deliberate, and sometimes is a tall figure in a bowler hat. Its body nothing but darkness shaped into a man, and other times it's this twisted, pale thing, like a person whose skin has been stretched too thinly, like dragging itself across my carpet. The second I lock eyes with it, it'll be gone, and the strangest part is I'll suddenly smell my grandmother's rose-scented hand cream, strong enough to make me gag, even though nothing of hers remains in the room. The hallway's the worst, no matter if it's 12 a.m. or 4 a.m. When I walk down it, icy air presses against the back of my neck. Lights on or not, it doesn't matter. The moment I glance behind me, it's just black, like the darkness itself is watching. Showers have turned into torture. Can't close my eyes without my pulse racing. Even a blink with soap in my eyes feels like an invitation for something standing just outside that curtain. Lately, sleep paralysis has joined in. Every time it's the same. The bowler hat man standing by the dresser and the pale crawler by the bed. To make it worse, I've started hearing faint scratching at my bedroom door. Never loud, just enough to let me know I'm not alone. Sometimes I'll pass a doorway and be hit with an unbearable grief, as if somebody poured sadness into me. I burst into tears without reason, and my chest aching with the grief that isn't mine. And for background, my house was built sometime around 1915. My family's always been prone to seeing things. I've felt presences all my life, but never this heavy and never this consistent. And I know it isn't psychological. It only happens here and only during those dead hours. The hat man is the constant. He's always waiting at the edge of sight. The moment I acknowledge him, he vanishes. I don't know if this is grief-taken form or something bound to the house, or something that followed me after my grandmother's death, but it's growing, and I'm terrified of what happens when it decides to stop hiding. The Compass of Midnight. Last night, I had one of those unsettling dreams that feels more like a memory than a dream. I quote-unquote woke up in my bed, only this time my phone was glowing a faint blue, humming like it had a heartbeat. The only app on my screen was an icon I didn't recognize, a compass surrounded by symbols I couldn't read. I tapped it and the needle spun violently before settling on a direction. The walls of my bedroom dissolved, and suddenly as I was standing inside like this vast abandoned train terminal with cracked tiles and flickering lights stretching into darkness. No people, no sound, just the endless echo of my own footsteps. The compass urged me forward, pointing down stairwells that seemed to go on forever. And at the bottom I found an enormous pair of bronze gates. They were covered in carvings that looked like half ancient, half mechanical. When I pushed them open, I entered a library so impossibly large it felt like it had no ceiling. Books floated in midair, their covers blank while voices whispered my name from nowhere. One book dropped into my hands heavy as stone, and I opened it and every single page repeated the same line over and over. You should not be here. My chest tightened and my whole body began to buzz like static. I felt myself sinking into that terrifying paralysis, and I screamed, "Wake up," until the dream just shattered. I really did wake up gasping in the dark, and I still don't know if I escaped something, or if I was pushed out. The Man at 213. I've never been the kind of person to buy into ghosts or spirits or anything beyond the ordinary. I enjoy supernatural stories as fiction, sure, but I've always kept a comfortable wall between spooky tales and my own life. At least until my mother reminded me of something strange from my childhood that I had completely forgotten. Now I'm not quite so sure. When I was about 6, and I'm 27 now, my grandparents decided they needed a single-story home, easier for them to manage. So my parents purchased their old house, and my grandparents moved somewhere more practical. That house, our house, was one of the rare survivors of the wartime bombings in the area. Its history alone made it feel like it carried a few shadows. At first, everything was fine. I had my very own upstairs room for the first time. But not long after, a habit formed. Every single night without fail, I'd leave my bed and knock on my parents' door. Always at the same time, at 2:13 a.m. Not 2:10, not 2:15, but 2:13 exactly. My parents brushed it off at first, and I was just a kid in a new home, probably being pretty unsettled. But after weeks of this, my mother began asking why I was doing it, and my answer was always the same. The man is keeping me awake. And sometimes I'd say, the man is bothering me. And that was it, no further details. Now, the logical assumption might be an intruder, but it doesn't fit. My mother's meticulous about locking every door and window before bed, and paranoid even. Besides, my room is upstairs, no fire escape or ladder. No way for anybody to sneak in. And the alarm system never so much as chirped. And this went on for a couple of years, and eventually I grew too big to squeeze into my parents' bed with them. So one of them, usually my father, ended up in the guest room while I was sleeping beside the other, and it wasn't sustainable. And my dad, for the record, is as skeptical as I am. He laughs at ghost stories and rolls his eyes at superstition. But even he reached a breaking point. One night, fed up, he marched into my bedroom alone and shouted into the darkness, "Whoever you are, stop this. You're frightening my son, and it ends tonight." A month later, my parents decided to remodel. They turned the guest room into my new bedroom and converted my old one into sort of a storage. After that, I never knocked on their door again, not even once. The oddest part is I don't remember any of it. Not the knocking, not the man, not even being scared. All I recall was occasionally sleeping with my parents because I couldn't settle down, that's it. So was it a child's imagination? Well, maybe. It's hard to ignore that I always woke at exactly the same time, and that my dad, staunch non-believer by the way, actually shouted at thin air to protect me. Maybe it worked. The Cloaked Watcher. This is still hard to say out loud. Even now, if I think about that night too long, I get goosebumps and my chest tightens. And I was 10 when it happened, and it branded itself pretty much into me like it was on fire. It took place in my great-grandmother's house. I never knew her, and she died years before I was born, but everyone in the family swore she wasn't like other people. My mom used to whisper about her strange books, the candles, the little jars of herbs and bones that she kept hidden. Nobody ever touched her old sewing room. The door's been locked for decades now. When my mom was a kid, she swore she heard chanting from behind that door, even when my great-grandmother was gone. Sometimes the door would rattle at night like something wanted out, and she always told us that that house wasn't just a house, but it was a container. Skip forward to that summer night, staying over with my dad at my grandparents' place. My grandpa was still alive then, but he wasn't really present anymore, just drifting and staring into corners like he was half in another world. It was maybe 1:45 in the a.m. And we had just finished watching some old action movie in the living room, but my dad told me to get some sleep, and I really wasn't tired, but I went anyway. Halfway down the hallway, I froze, and my whole body was locked up before I even knew why, and that's when I saw it. A towering figure, must have been 7, maybe 8 feet tall, and it slipped past me. It didn't walk, not really. It kind of more like glided, with its cloak dragged along the ground in heavy folds, swallowing all the light in the process. No face, no hands, just a moving shadow draped in layers of black. came from the back hallway, where my great-grandmother's locked room was, passing right in front of me, and drifted toward the porch door. I couldn't move, and my pulse hammered so violently I thought I'd collapse. I tried to reason with myself. Maybe it was my dad, but I could still hear him just shifting at the couch behind me. My grandpa couldn't even stand without help, and my grandma was asleep upstairs. No one could have been there, and still I forced myself forward. Each step like walking through water, and I reached the porch and nothing. No sound, no movement. Just the stillness of the air, thick and suffocating. That's when all the stories came back to me. The locked door and the chants and the jars. Bolted back to my dad and clung to him so tightly he asked if I had a nightmare, and I didn't answer. I just couldn't. By morning, my grandpa was gone. I don't know if what I saw was connected. Maybe my brain short-circuited, maybe grief warped my senses, but deep down, I know what I witnessed, and I can still feel that hallway air pressing on me, heavy like the house itself was waiting. Years later, I still can't explain it. Part of me doesn't want to. The wet footsteps. So this went down last night, around 3:30 in the morning. My cousin, who is 29, swears he heard heavy, wet footsteps, just like a couple of meters behind his bed, and everybody else, me, my grandparents, and my uncle, sleep upstairs on the second floor. He's the only one who sleeps downstairs. For context, I'm from Lithuania. My family is pretty religious. He said he woke up to the sound of somebody walking, not shuffling, not creaking, but actual footsteps. He turned on lights, opened his door, and nothing. The noise stopped dead and the hallway was empty. At first, I thought maybe a rat or something, but he was very clear, and it sounded like a grown man, like 90 to 100 kilos, like slapping around in dripping wet slippers. Pretty creepy. He went to the bathroom, came back, and somehow managed to fall back asleep. I want to say it was a dream, or maybe he exaggerated, but the way he described it, all the little details, it sounded too real, and he insists he knows exactly what he heard. The thing is when he told his mom, she said the exact same thing happened to her years ago. Not just her, but my uncle's ex-girlfriend too. About 10 years back, they're staying at the same room. Both of them heard somebody heavily, like walking up and down these stairs, then actually rattling the doorknob, same weight, same time of night, around 3 or 4 a.m. Me and my dad have also slept in that room a few times, and every single time there's this pressure, like the air's heavier. Not scary exactly, but unsettling. My grandma once brought a mass for her brother. Bought a mass. My grandma once bought a mass for her brother, who drowned decades ago. After that, all the noises stopped, and for years nothing, but now it's back, and honestly, none of us are too comfortable with that. The white swaying shadow. This isn't my own encounter, but something my mother shared with me. She's 41 now, and for nearly 2 decades she worked as a geriatric nurse in a nursing home. Back in 2015, her father died of lung cancer. She had no intention of attending his funeral. Her stepmother and stepsister would be there, and they had made her life miserable ever since her father remarried. But before the funeral, during one of her late shifts, something happened. That night, she was the only nurse on a unit with more than 30 residents. The first thing was small and almost laughable. The hydration schedules, well, the charts showed with each resident what they needed to drink, and they were scattered on the floor in the kitchen. No windows were open and no breeze, and no resident nearby. She just shook her head and muttered, "Weird, but fine." Then came the second thing. She heard one of the heavy wooden doors moving. Not slamming, not creaking, but nudging back and forth. It was as if somebody pressed it open and then let it fall shut again and again. The metallic click of the lock echoed against the frame, and she checked with no draft and open window, nothing that could explain it. And then came the moment she swears she'll never forget. There was a small courtyard outside, accessible by a door with a glass panel. She had just shut that door when she caught sight of something behind her. A pale white shape, solid, not glowing, swayed side to side, gliding across her vision. It didn't move like a person walking. It seemed to float, and the height and the outline, even the hair, looked like her father. He had always worn his hair a little long and had that detail froze her sort of in place. Terrified, she bolted across the unit to find her coworker. Oddly enough, after she gave in and went to the funeral, the strange activity stopped, almost as if he just wanted her to say goodbye properly. And to this day, she sometimes catches his cologne in the air. No source, no bottle around. Just that sudden sharp note of perfume, and I can confirm it too. It's creepy. The face at the door. I'm 17, freshly moved into this new apartment in South Carolina. My mom's been here a month ahead of me, and I joined just last week. And to be blunt, the place is a mess with dirty walls and light switches painted over and bugs marching around like they own the place. First floor unit, not the best part of town. It's the kind of place where you mind your business and lock up twice. And I've always loved scary things like movies or creepy podcasts and Reddit rabbit holes, but ghost stories give me chills, but I still eat them up. The problem is I scare too easily, and lately I think the apartment is playing with that weakness. I have a 1-year-old cat named Milo. Usually calm, but since we moved in, he's turned into a professional scaredy cat. When someone unlocks the front door, he bolts, and that's normal, but now he hides underneath the bed and sometimes even burrows into my blanket pile like he's expecting a war. And at night, instead of hanging out near his food, he lurks in the kitchen shadows, staring into corners like he sees something I don't. And the other night, I'm just lying in bed scrolling my phone while a horror podcast droned in the background. My mom was asleep with the door cracked open. But the only light came from the TV, and Milo was curled up at my feet. Until suddenly, he sprang up, eyes fixed on the doorway, and then he hopped down, crouched under my desk and froze, hovering at the door like he was watching something step closer. I glanced at the crack in the door, and for a split second, I swear I saw it. A faint outline, like a grainy silhouette cut from the dark itself. Not glowing eyes, not anything obvious, just the shape of a face, hovering where no face should be. My chest went cold, and I called for my mom, choking back tears. I've never cried over being scared before, not like this. She came in and took me seriously. Searched the apartment together. It's small, so it didn't take long, but when we reached the dining room, she noticed the back door unlocked, and neither of us had touched it. That unsettled me more than the shadow. He didn't stay the night in my room, but I lay awake, praying and feeling that thick, heavy energy pressing in. Like, was it paranoia, or did something else move in with us? I don't know if the apartment is haunted, but I know Milo sees something I can't, and that's what terrifies me. The locked stall. Started on a Tuesday morning, when me and 3 friends decided we just couldn't deal with the first period. Instead of going to class, we slipped into the auditorium, completely dark and totally empty, and headed straight for the bathroom. Nobody ever went in there. We knew the door is locked automatically once shut, so we dragged in a metal chair across the stage to keep it open. And inside the bathroom, we crammed into the biggest stall and sat in the cold tile and started whispering. That's when one of my friends casually dropped. You know, yesterday we talked to a dead girl in here. I froze and I said, what do you mean? She said that the day before, she and another friend were hiding in the same bathroom when a girl came in. complaining about how much she hated the auditorium, how it was always crowded and too loud, and they watched her walk into a stall and lock it and then never come out, and she just vanished. 30 minutes later, we heard it in the scrape of our chair moving, followed by the heavy slam of the bathroom door locking shut. My stomach flipped, and we thought a teacher had found us. Then the door creaked open, slow and loudly, and we heard footsteps coming closer, and they were too steady and too deliberate. Two voices began to whisper, not loud enough to understand, but close enough that every hair on my arm stood up, and then a flush and a crying. A girl's sobs echoing through the bathroom. I thought maybe I was imagining it until my friend whispered, "You hear that too, right?" Another friend peeked under the stall and shook her head violently. No one was there. I tried to record it. My phone screen froze like it had locked itself. And just when it did unfreeze, the sounds from the auditorium began, like dozens of voices, muffled but urgent, as if the whole crowd had gathered. Music, too, faint but real. None of us wanted to open the stall, and we sat there, barely breathing, and my sneakers squeaked back and forth across the floor. Shadows moved, but no legs appeared under the stalls. When the bell rang finally, we bolted, and the chair we'd left was gone. Always silent. We didn't look back, we just sprinted for the other doors that led outside. I made a 2-second period, but I couldn't focus, and to this day, bathroom stalls make me nervous. Not because of what's inside, but because of who might never leave them. The Man in the Shadowed Glasses. A couple of months back, I stumbled into watching this channel called Mind Unveiled. At first, I thought it was standard late-night conspiracy entertainment. Strange theories about lost civilizations and free energy and hidden magic. Nothing too serious. More like digital popcorn for the brain, but after a while I realized the threads ran deeper into mysticism and gnosticism and ideas that felt more ancient than the internet itself. The internet isn't very ancient. One afternoon, not long after, sort of binging a few of those videos, I went to Target with my sister. Everything was normal until we got near the self-checkout. That's when I noticed him, an older man, maybe in his late 40s, standing near the lottery ticket machine. He was dressed plainly, with jeans and polo, like everyone's dad, basically. But what had caught me off guard was the way he was staring. He wore thick mirrored sunglasses indoors, the kind that almost took like chrome and, well, looked like chrome. I just screwed up completely. I couldn't see his eyes at all, yet I knew they were fixed directly on me. And as we walked past, his head followed, and slowly, unnervingly, like somebody trying to memorize every angle of my face. The whole thing felt wrong, as if I'd just stepped into one of those surreal dream sequences where time drags into slow motion. In my mind, I still replayed the image, him lowering the glasses, and behind them, not eyes, just blackness. And the part that unsettled me the most, no one else seems to notice. The cashier kept scanning items. People in line, scrolling their phones, my sister picking at the pack of gum, and, well, when I asked her later, she said that she saw the guy, but insisted he wasn't wearing sunglasses at all. She swore he barely glanced her way. Meanwhile, I was left with this sharp, cold feeling crawling down my spine, like I'd just brushed past something that wasn't supposed to be there. I don't know if it was paranormal or psychological or just my imagination running off after too many strange videos. All I know is that even now, months later, whenever I think about it, the memory doesn't fade like a normal one. It lingers, and unnaturally so, sinister and sharp, like the stare of a man whose eyes you never should have tried to meet. The House of Echoes. Either we've got a mimic living in our house, or something is tagging along with me. Didn't even know that was a thing, but here we are. Set the scene, we're a family of 5. Me, a 26-year-old female. Husband, a 31-year-old male, and our 3 kids aged 7, 3, and 6 months. We're renting in Australia, and my husband works late shifts, usually stumbling home around midnight, which is just the perfect time for spooky nonsense, apparently. And for a while, I thought it was just me losing the plot. Little personal experiences here and there, but lately, things have ramped up. My partner has had experiences too. I even managed to catch something on video, and of course, it refuses to upload anywhere. Classic horror movie timing. Here's the rundown. My 3-year-old takes an afternoon nap one day. I swear I heard him get up, little feet dragging down the hallway. I even saw him peeking at me around the corner like he was trying to play peekaboo. Never popped back out, and when I went to check, yep, still sound asleep in his bed. Door shut and he can't even reach the handle yet. Another night I had him in bed with me, trying to settle him, and out of nowhere, his monitor lit up with the sound of him crying. But he was right there, breathing beside me. Never felt such a cold terror, and I actually started crying. A week ago, we swapped the kids' bedrooms around, and that night while I was laying with the toddler, I heard my 7-year-old softly singing through the monitor, muffled but clear. Their rooms are neighbors now, so I figured the monitor was picking up sound from his bed. But I went to tell him to be quiet. He was out cold, and I shook him just to be sure. Dead asleep. And that's the night I got the recording. My husband heard doors slam when no one's around. 7-year-old's alarm clock has started blaring in the middle of the night for no reason. And we both get that horrible feeling of being watched when we're up making bottles at 2 a.m. And here's the thing. This is new for me. All my life I've had these heated home moments. Like I'll hear my husband's keys at the door and hear him walking with me into the kitchen. But then I'll realize I'm completely alone, and it's escalating though. Different houses, same feelings. So now I'm left wondering, is it after my kids, since it's copying them, or is it really after me, just using their voices and faces as a disguise? And the worst part, what if it's both? The return of Clara. There's a woman who visits me in my room at night. Her skin is pale, almost the color of ash, and her hair hangs in a long, damp strand as if she just stepped out of a lake, and she wears a faded blue dress that looks like it belonged to somebody a century ago. Stitched lace on the sleeves, frayed at the edges. She always appears in the same corner near my window, never anywhere else. When she shows up, it's like the air thickens and my body won't respond, like I've been nailed to the bed frame. I don't know if it's her paralyzing me or if she's just pulling the energy out of me until I can't move. But the strange thing is even when she isn't there, I can feel her. Not paralyzing me, but I'm watching somehow. My room is usually bright at night, warm lamps and soft light. I don't scare easily, so no, I don't think I'm paranoid. The first time she came was 3 years ago. I had just shut off the bathroom light when I felt her right behind me in the hallway, and I froze. I couldn't move. I couldn't even blink for maybe 4 minutes. Until a week later, she returned. Same place, same paralysis. And then, nothing. For 3 whole years, she vanished. Until now. She hasn't appeared in front of me lately, but her presence is back. A month ago, I found myself locked in the bathroom across from my room. The door only locks from the inside, and I never lock it. Unless I did without realizing, which is unlikely. 2 weeks later, I heard 3 loud knocks against the wall beside my bed, sharp and deliberate knocks. Too loud to ignore, and last night I dreamt of her. She stood at the foot of my bed and whispered her name, and she said, "I'm Clara." I don't know a Clara. No one by that name has ever lived here, as far as I know. No death records in this house either. But she's here, and for reasons I can't explain, she refuses to leave my room. That was the name of my old bearded dragon. Whispers beneath the redwoods. Last night, Something unusual happened that I can't quite shake, and I'm wondering if anybody else has had odd encounters at the Cathedral Grove, or might know what it could have been. My sister and I were heading back to the Courtenay after spending the day wandering Tofino's beaches. On a whim, we pulled into Cathedral Grove just past midnight. We didn't go into the trails, just parked and stood near the towering silhouettes of the Douglas firs. Even by daylight, those trees feel like guardians from like another age, but at night, the stillness was so complete it felt unnatural, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. The air grew heavy, almost charged, and the silence pressed against us. And then out of nowhere, a sharp metallic ringing echoed through the dark, like two iron rods being struck together. Moments later, a deep crackling voice, wood splitting, and maybe a heavy stone tossed against another came from further in. My sister grabbed my arm, and without even discussing it, we both knew we weren't welcome there. We both backed into the car and drove until the shadows of the forest were far behind us. The logical explanation is, of course, it's an animal. That's the safe, comfortable answer. But the feeling was too intentional, as though something unseen had taken notice of us and wanted us gone. I've tried searching online, but I haven't found much about strange happenings at the Cathedral Grove. Has anybody heard stories or folklore or local tales about spirits or guardians of that forest? Because standing there, it didn't feel like we were surrounded by trees. It felt like we were trespassing in someone else's domain. The office bell that wouldn't stay silent. Something odd has been happening at my mom's office, and honestly, it has me rattled because it defies any logical explanation. There's an electric bell in her office. Harmless enough, right? Except it rings on its own. At first, the staff thought it was a wiring issue, so they replaced the bell. Well, problem solved. Well, not at all. The new one is just as haunted as the old one. The strangest part is the timing. It doesn't just ring at random and often goes off in the evenings, just as everyone is wrapping up for the day. Even creepier, it sometimes rings precisely when people talk about it. Almost like it's eavesdropping and wants to join the conversation. Then there's the matter of the air conditioner. The office boy swears he switches it off every night, yet more than once it's been found humming quietly the next morning. Once he's even claimed he saw a swivel chair roll slightly forward by itself, and he went to check on the AC, so... Yesterday, my mom decided to push things further. Instead of ignoring it, she tried to communicate. Standing quietly in the office, she closed her eyes and asked questions in her mind. Do you need something from me? Are you trapped? Are you male or female? Do you want release from this place? She asked for answers through the bell. 2 rings for yes, 5 quick rings for no. And the terrifying part is the bell obeyed perfectly. 2 slow rings for yes, 5 rapid ones for no. And she asked about 6 questions, and each time the responses matched her instructions. Now she's convinced that some lost spirit is trying to reach out, hoping for some kind of help, I guess. I'm doing my best to stay rational, but it's hard not to be unsettled, especially since she's in India, dealing with this firsthand while I'm stuck here in Germany, helplessly worrying from afar. See ya.
Don't you worry. Here at Paranormal M, we hear your comments. And I'm here to guarantee you that there is no use of any AI or editing software. All stories that you're about to hear are true accounts, however they may be written. So get ready to unleash your curiosity and unlock the door to the unknown. I'm your companion on the quest for answers to the most perplexing paranormal phenomena. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell to embark on this mind-bending adventure. Different premonition. There are a short period in my life where I've been able to predict who I'm going to meet in the day or what's going to happen in that day. It began with my grandma. I suddenly felt that she was visiting at my parents' house, so I called to tell them and she was already there. Another day I took the bus and told my friends that we have to have 2 accidents in a single trip. And this is what happened. I've been able to do that one for about a month with teachers, friends, family, and the last one in this period was the death of a family member. And then it suddenly stopped, and I really felt the stop. You cannot do this anymore. And I also remember that when I was very young, maybe 8, I was on my way home from school alone, and in my head, I've said something like, I'm about to find a red kitty in the next street. And guess what? A very sick red kitty. It was exactly how I saw him in my head. I gave him to a family member because I couldn't take him to school, but I just had news. Recently it came back. I was wondering what it would feel like if I had my nose broken. During the night, I accidentally broke my nose, and 3 more times the following month. It may be coincidental, but I'm not convinced. Here I summarize as much as possible, but I've experienced many, many paranormal experiences. This is very difficult to find explanations for. I come from the Occitanian culture, which comes from the old times when French and Spanish culture were somehow mixed. There are some hypotheses, but I'd like to have the point of view of several cultures. Today I learned that premonitions run in my family, and I'm looking for answers. Let me preface this by saying that I'm not per se a believer in the supernatural, but I'm also not a denier either. I take the approach of, there's a lot in this world I don't understand, and I'm willing to give the benefit of the doubt. But one thing that's been bothering me for as long as I can remember are experiences where I would dream about something bad happening, or get an inexplicable feeling of impending doom, which often is followed by notable circumstances happening shortly after. Often bad, but sometimes rarely good too. The most notable example would be when I explicitly told my brother, CW, suicide. Our dad would either kill himself or one of us soon. And soon after, my father killed himself by accident. Brain tumor caused him to accidentally leave a chainsaw running in the car while he was in it. Caused him to suffocate himself. Notably, a good friend of mine had also given me a tarot card reading of death only a month or so prior. They assured me that the card didn't mean literal death, but change. But I had a strong feeling at the time that in this case, the change would be death. Some more subtle but notable things would be my gut feelings about people after I just met them, telling me they're a danger, which would later turn out to be correct. Or sometimes just knowing that something is very important about being able to explain how or why. Anyway, this morning I woke up from a nightmare, only to immediately be told by my partner, who woke up before me, about the volcanic eruption. We live in New Zealand, so it's relevant to us. This whole day I've just had a gut feeling that something more is coming, so I've been calling my friends and family to tell them to be careful, and I mentioned the nightmare to my mom. That's when she told me that she never wanted to tell me because she was worried that she'd scare me, but that she herself had been having prophetic dreams all of her life, and she's been suspecting for a long time that I inherited the same ability as her. In short, I'm shocked and honestly a bit scared. I don't know what to make of it. My mom is a very, very religious woman and is strictly against anything superstitious. For her to tell me something so openly is a big deal. So many random things are just coming back to me now, which all seems so impossible, and I guess I just want to hear other people's thoughts and stories. Please don't take this as a story to debunk. Again, I'm sure that there are probably perfectly rational explanations for these things. All of this just brought up memories of how my friend's conspiracy theorist father made a big deal about how I have a rainbow chakra or something, and how I sometimes feel like I can see ghosts, even though I don't even strictly believe in them. My eyes catch glimpses of shadows all the time, which I now just jokingly call shadow people. Yeah, I know those are a thing, because they fit the term. Something is in that house. So my fiance used to live in this run-down, extremely old house. We're pretty sure it was actually a barn at one point that was then converted into a home. Well, let me tell you, that house is the most haunted location I've ever stepped foot in to this day. It's been almost 4 years since we've been inside, and we'll never go back. When my fiancée was younger, she was kicked out of her childhood home and went to live with her best friend just down the road. Her room was actually a porch with its own exterior door, and a door leading into the living room of the home. Just to set the scene for you a bit, she had vaguely warned me that there was something, quote-unquote, in the house, but I kind of just brushed it off. Well, one night, I went to stay over with her. It was the end of the night, we were both pretty tired, and decided to go to bed. We got underneath the covers, all cuddled up, and not even 2 minutes after turning the lights out and closing our eyes, it happened. It sounded as if something very large and almost animalistic stomped from the other end of her room right up to the side of the bed and began breathing heavily, almost rhythmically, while staring down at us. I know she heard it too, because the breathing began to get faster and faster, and the faster that thing was breathing, the tighter she was squeezing me. I never asked her if she felt the same, but I could feel that whatever that thing was, it was evil. We both looked absolutely terrified, couldn't think of what was looming over us like that, both too petrified to even open our eyes. We just laid there, gripping each other out of pure terror. And then all at once, it just stopped. At the very same second, the loud breathing stopped the air around us, and it just got lighter. I shot up, my eyes darting around the room looking for anything to explain what we had just experienced. But there was nothing, just a dark room around us. We slept with all the lights on the rest of that night. A different night that I was there, a glass of a picture frame shattered and woke us up. We would hear running upstairs in the loft, even though there was nobody else in the house, and whispering that sounded like there was someone just outside the window trying to tell you a secret. Something would bang on the door in between her room and the living room while violently shaking the doorknob. One day, an old baby picture of someone neither of us recognized just showed up on our table, and the nightmares I had when I would sleep there were unlike any I'd ever had in my life. But nothing compared to the fear that I felt the night that thing walked right up on us, watching us in bed from less than a foot away. I'll never forget that. Footsteps in my room. I was 11, staying at my father's place for Christmas holidays. The house and the apartment was new. So was the small neighborhood of identical 4-story houses. I was staying in the kids' room that had a bunk bed. The room didn't have much furniture apart from that, and a carpet on the floor, because none of my dad's kids were staying there full time. Until my second sister was born later. Anyhow, I was sleeping on the bottom bed. My dad was in the living room playing video games, and he would stay up till 4 or 5 a.m. I was trying to fall asleep when I heard footsteps on the carpet in my room. Soft footsteps that were walking on the carpet, sounding as if they were approaching me. I was facing the wall, too terrified to look behind me. I never felt such fear in my life. Hearing it became so terrifying that I called out to my dad a few times. He would come into the room, sit with me for a few minutes so I'd calm down, but I wasn't able to fall asleep while he was there. He would go back to playing video games, and the footsteps continued. They weren't audible when he was there. Certainly wasn't the sound from his PC in the living room. The sound was clearly in my room. Didn't sound like the neighbors above either. The sound was too clear and soft. I would call out to Dad. He would sit with me, and again he would leave the footsteps, and they would resume. He became annoyed at me after a few times, so I ended up sleeping on the top bed with the lights on. I remember crying and being upset that my dad didn't believe me. After a while being on the top bed, I started to hear purring. I wasn't sure if it was my stuffy nose or actual purring, but at the time, it really calmed me down. A few months ago, before that cat died, and I was still not over it. So it made me happy to hear that, even though it happened in another country, at my mother's place. So I'm not sure about that sound. I fell asleep shortly after. The footsteps didn't happen anymore after that, when I stayed there. Eventually, my dad rented out that apartment. The only other weird instances that happened there, but not in any other place I've lived, is me sleepwalking when I was 8. My dad told me that I would come out of my room and I'd go into the corridor and stare at the front door. Creepiest thing that's happened to me. So I live in a rural place and in a heavily wooded area. I've always felt totally safe in the woods, even at night. I used to go for night walks all the time. I'm not really a skeptic. I do believe in some paranormal things, though I've never had an experience until this one. Regardless, I still always try to find the most logical explanation. I don't often feel scared or unnerved by things. This experience, however, really freaked me out, and I've been thinking about it ever since it happened, so I thought I'd share. So this was a few weeks ago. My parents had gone to bed, but I wanted to stay up late, so I settled into the living room to read. Our living room has these giant windows almost covering the entire wall. I left the blinds open and turned on one lamp and sat right by the window. My elderly dog, who had been let out already to go to the bathroom for the night and was back inside, started pacing all throughout the house and barking and wouldn't settle down. This is unlike her. She's super old, so she usually goes right to bed, and she knows not to bark in the house like that. We let her out again, and she walked right back in. We gave her some food, and still, for about an hour, she kept pacing and barking. She wasn't even barking at the windows or looking outside. She just paced up and down the halls and barked at nothing in particular. This kind of weirds me out, but I just shrugged it off. And then she finally settled down to sleep in my parents' bedroom. About 20 minutes later, I'm reading on the couch by the window with my cat when I hear my animal walking outside. I only hear it take a few steps. It sounded large, and I figured that it was probably a deer. My cat jumps up and acts super interested in what's outside, pacing up and down the windowsill and peering out there. Then after a few minutes, the screen of the window furthest from me across the room starts shaking violently, like something is shaking or banging on them very hard. Again, these windows span the whole wall. It startled me and I looked over. I couldn't make anything out in the dark to see what was outside, and then the shaking and banging grew even more violent, and the windows next to me started shaking too. My cat freaked out and ran out of the room. At this point, I was really scared, and I just did something that you'll probably think is kind of silly. I literally closed my eyes and threw the blanket over my head and waited for it to stop. The shaking and banging lasted for several more seconds. I remember being taken aback at how much force it seemed to have behind it. I just couldn't bring myself to look. I had an awful feeling, and I think if I looked and saw something horrible, it would really traumatize me. It finally stopped, and I stayed under the blanket for 2 entire hours before I could work up the nerve to get up and go to my bedroom. The next morning, after I wake up, I've calmed down a lot and figured it was probably some kind of animal. I went outside to go look at the window to see if I could find tracks or something and look at the screens, but what I found made my skin crawl. There was a single, long, diagonal slash in the window screen of the window that I was sitting right next to. If you're standing in front of where the slash is and looking inside, the slash aligns right over the spot I was sitting. No tracks. So that's creepy as fuck. And what's weird to me is that if it were an animal, why weren't there more slashes? Just one single deliberate slash is strange. There were absolutely no scratch marks or slashes anywhere else on the screens or around the windows, just that one. The other screens were just pretty loose now. If it was a bird, I would have heard wings flapping. I feel like I would have heard animal sounds if it were any other kind of animal. If it was a person, which is even scarier to me, I would think someone would just do something like this, would take it further, and probably would have done more to scare and intimidate than to just shake some windows and slash one, and then leave just to scare me. Besides the shaking and banging, there was absolutely no other sounds. And since we live rurally, the chance that it was a person seems more unlikely. It freaks me the fuck out, but there's nothing I can really do about it, other than pump up the trail cams. Other than put up trail cams. Nothing like this has ever happened to me the entire time I've lived here. A few nights before this happened, I actually started feeling some bad vibes from the woods at night. And to be honest, like I said, I'm normally very at ease with them. But I was out smoking a few nights before in my backyard and just felt like I was being watched. Something was making my skin crawl. And I had been avoiding going outside at night again. And then this happened. This experience really kind of freaked me out. But there's not much I can do except put up some cameras. My grandfather came back to say goodbye. Full disclosure, this happened about 11 years ago. I was 10 years old at the time. think. But I still remember it. I'm not sure if I'll ever forget. My granddad had gotten cancer. I don't remember what kind it was, but I hadn't thought anything of it when it first started. I assumed he was just getting old. He was in his mid-50s at that time. It was winter break, and my brothers and I were staying at a family friend's house. She and her husband had been friends with my grandparents since before I was born, and they lived about 100 feet away. That night, I had a dream. It was cloudy, I believe, or was it fog? Either way, it was overcast. My grandfather's white Chevy Silverado was parked out on the street by his and my grandma's house. He was sitting on the toolbox installed on the trunk. I don't remember his exact words, but he said he loved me and he wanted to say goodbye before he left. I was pretty close to my granddad and I was confused. I didn't understand what he was going on about, but I woke up. I didn't understand where he was going either. When I did wake up, my parents were there. I was confused because they usually waited to be called before coming to get my brother and I. They sat us down and explained that our granddad passed away peacefully in his sleep last night. I was really upset, asked my brothers if they had any dreams about him last night. They both said yes, and recounted the exact same dream that I had had. I realized that he had come to say goodbye before leaving. I'm not sure if he visited my grandma as well, but I am sure that he would have let her know that he loved her. Maybe 3 or 5 years ago, I asked my brothers if they remembered this, but they said no. But I know it was real. I was raised Christian, and I know the Lord let him say goodbye to us one last time. I've been keeping that inside for the past 11 years. But I'm not imagining things. My wife has been visiting me. My wife and I were married for 28 years before she passed away 14 months ago. She died of a heart attack, and it was very quick. My 3 teenage children lost their mother, and I lost my best friend. I was in a deep state of shock and grief for the first 6 months. I had a few dreams about her that felt very real. We would have conversations in these dreams, and I just assumed that this was my subconscious dealing with the grief and finding some closure. Then on Valentine's Day, I went to bed. I pulled the sheet over my head, and just as I was falling asleep, someone slaps me in the face 3 times and lays down on top of me. I sit up and it's my wife. And I'm definitely scared, but happy and excited and confused at the same time. I say, "Laura?" And she answers me saying, "Yes, it's me, and I love you." I couldn't see her face because she had her head turned away from me, and I asked her to look at me, and she told me that she couldn't. I just held her, and after a little while, she faded away. The next morning, I called my daughter, and I told her what happened. I told her that her mom had visited me last night. She said that, yeah, Mom visits me in my dreams occasionally. I told her no, she was here with me in person, in the bed with me. My daughter just said, "Oh, that's sweet." After about 3 weeks, I had come to the conclusion that I had just hallucinated the whole thing. I know how powerful the mind is, and some very strange things happen when you're dealing with grief. I moved into a new home in March, and one night I was in the living room, and it was cold in the house, maybe 55 degrees. I was getting ready to go to bed when I noticed that I could see my breath. Because even though it was cold, it certainly wasn't that cold. I laid down in bed, and right before I fell asleep, I felt my dog climb into the bed and scoot up against my back. I was laying on my side and I thought it was weird because my dog doesn't normally get in bed with me. I was looking at the bedroom door into the living room when I see my dog walk by. So of course I freak out and roll over quickly, and there she is, my wife again. Only this time I can see her face and it's completely black. I mean, like black as midnight. I tell her I love her. She says I love you. And I ask about her skin. She says apparently that's something that happens where she's at. We have a very long conversation. She tells me that she's made some friends and it's okay where she's at. She also says it's very cold. She tells me that she's with me. She's going to stay with me. But after a while, she fades away. This has happened probably 10 more times since March. We've had sex a couple of times, but mostly we just hold each other and talk. More often than not, I keep a sheet between us. I normally sleep with a sheet above me, and she normally smacks me on the face 2 or 3 times to get my attention. This is very real, and I'm just relaying something new that's happening in my life that I think most people in the subreddit might be interested in. I know I was, as the narrator. A ghost waited until I had laryngitis to attack. TLDR at the bottom. Obligatory, this happened in 2017. FYI, my room is in the basement and had a hopper window with a streetlight outside, so my room wasn't pitch black but very lightly illuminated. Still too dark to make features out from across a room with the lights off, though. I, a 25-year-old female, was laying in bed facing the wall, and my bed was pushed against, and it felt like someone was over near my closet across the room looking at me. My back was to the closet, but I could just feel it, so I turned around and got my phone flashlight. Nothing was there. Okay. I went back to sleep. A few days go by and I feel like somebody's looking at me again. My back is to my closet again. I'm facing the wall. This time they feel closer, like in the middle of my room between the closet and my bed. I grab my phone flashlight and look. Nothing. Back to sleep. Facing my room this time because I swear I've been feeling something looking at me and getting closer and closer every few days. I was starting to get terrified. So like a week goes by and I feel it getting closer and closer, but I see nothing every time. Eventually my back is to my room again, and I feel like it's standing right at the side of my bed, standing over me. I turned around quick, no flashlight, looked up and saw nothing, but it felt like it was there, staring at me. I grabbed my phone flashlight without looking away or blinking. Nothing. I go back to sleep eventually. A few more days go by and I'm sick, laryngitis, no voice, the whole 9. My friend, a 25-year-old male, lived with me and my parents at this time. This was like 5 years ago. He was upstairs because I lived in the basement and his room was upstairs. My back is to my room. I feel it staring again, except it feels far away, like back at my closet across the room. I have no voice, remember this. I look at my closet in the dark and stare while reaching for my phone. I'm scared and it feels different this time. Angry. I don't blink or take my eyes off of the closet. I see a black outline of what looks like a woman in a long dress, like 1800 style. Maybe my imagination. Finally get my flashlight on. Before I can point it at my closet, it comes rushing towards me, still all black. Not walking, just gliding directly towards me, very swift. I scream, no voice. It doesn't touch me as it goes away from the phone's flashlight as it lit up the room. I scream and crawl to the end of my bed and flick the light on again. I'm screaming my friend's name, help, but no voice. I call his phone. He's upstairs and I can barely make words because the no voice thing, and I whisper, come help. He comes, and I'm hyperventilating in my bed, holding my knees, staring at the closet. I tell him, whispering, what happened, and how I felt it building up for weeks. But ghosts terrify me, and I didn't want to give it energy by entertaining it or telling anyone. He takes me upstairs, and I sleep on the couch, and he sleeps in the armchair. I sleep in the living room for a few nights. He eventually tells me that when he falls asleep on the couch, sometimes he hears someone walk back and forth in the kitchen and stop on the ledge where the kitchen goes into the living room. But he doesn't ever see anything. Nothing ever happened to me again, and I never saw or felt anything again since then. A house ruined my 2 years of life. I moved into this house in July of 2016. It was just my father and I. It was a nice 3-bedroom house in a nice, well-kept neighborhood on the outskirts of town. When I first visited the house for a viewing, it was like a dream, and it was the only house that we had seen that really stood out to us. We eventually ended up choosing it because of how much we loved it. There were no negative feelings, no feelings of sickness, nothing. But as soon as we moved in, things started to change in ways that we couldn't really understand. Doors would close on their own. Lights would shut off or on after you left a room. The unmistakable sound of someone in the garage and back porch. And just an overall sense of unease. The house always felt like it held heavy air, and that sense of ease never lifted. Even when I had friends over, nothing ever seemed to help. At night, it felt like you were being watched from the corners of the room, and the only room I felt safe in at any point was my room. But I often sort of cleansed it and burned incense frequently to keep up with ritualistically. That seemed to help a lot, keeping that room energy free. The first instance I can remember so vividly, it still shakes me to my core. It was during my first month of living there. I had been sleeping on the couch in the living room because there was just something about my bedroom that kept me from sleeping. The only place I felt comfortable enough to sleep had been the living room. I remember falling asleep around 10 p.m. and had a very, very strange dream, from which I woke up from another dream that still makes me horribly anxious to think about. I had woken up and slowly started to sit up. I was in my living room where I had fallen asleep, but my body felt very heavy. And it felt physically like I was laying down on my couch, but I was very much sitting up. It was still dark out, and started to look for my phone, when a figure down the hall by my dad's door caught my attention. It was a very tall and dark figure standing there. It was darker than the hall around it, and it felt downright aggressive, like I had done something personally to offend it. But before I could even move, it was charging at me. I felt the floor shake and heard the sound of rustling fabric and very deep, labored breathing, which only stopped as I shot awake, sitting up from the couch. Nothing was out of place. The only thing that had hinted something having been there was my cat, who had his back hunched and was hissing toward the hallway. Luckily, it was roughly 7 a.m., and the sun started to rise. I didn't move from my spot till the entire room was covered in the light of the sun. When my dad lost his job, it was when I was about 18 and we had to sell the house. Things started to stir when everything started to be moved out of the house. Due to my dad having to get a job in the city, he was going to move in with his friend, who lived not far from said city. He was going to help me get an apartment when I turned 18, since we were likely going to sell the house after my birthday. Well, that left me alone in the house by myself after my dad moved out, only coming down on weekends to take me into town to get food as I couldn't drive at the time. During this time, I moved my bed into the now empty living room because my room began to feel so unsafe and heavy. At this point, I was cleansing my room and house every day, but it never made it feel any better. The only place I felt I could be safe and watch over the house was in the living room. So, that's where I stayed. When I would turn off the lights to go to bed, I would hear footsteps walking up and down the hall, never approaching the living room. And eventually they would stop, but not before they would start to speed walk toward the living room and just stop a few feet shy of the living room. Sometimes I would hear knocking in the kitchen when the cats would be laying with me, and the dog would already be with my dad. There'd be a knock here, and then almost rhythmic for a few seconds, and then stop. Every night I experienced terrible night terrors that I couldn't wake up from, where a man with an unidentifiable face would be screaming somewhere in the house. He would wake me up and then would come storming out into the living room. At this point, he would point at me and continue yelling before stomping up to me as I scrambled to get away. He got on top of me and started strangling me. And as he did this, his face would distort into this terrifying face I can't even begin to describe, while the house would begin to set ablaze. This happened every night until I moved down. Some smaller instances where I was living there. The sound of a man yelling and screaming in the garage, throwing tools around, and very loud music. But when you'd go to check out, you'd just be met with a dark, dead, silent, and untouched garage. Couldn't have been from my neighbors either. I lived in a cul-de-sac. My neighbors were placed just far enough that you could barely see their front door. From the street, my house and the other house were one of the only houses that you really can see the front door, while the street and all the other houses are the ones that you could hear. And our neighbors were always quiet besides when their family and friends would come over. I would constantly wake up with bruises all over my body, but they often looked like fingers. There was usually 2 or 3 in the same place. I would often sort of take time in the mirror to see the bruises that weren't actually there on my face, my neck, and my torso, and had people point out bruises that would be gone in minutes, if not seconds. My grandmother left me flowers after her death. First off, I was very close to my grandmother. I was her first grandchild, and we had the most amazing bond. Now, as a 27-year-old man, I still occasionally feel this happy urge to go and visit her, even though she's been gone for years. She taught me a lot of things, including gardening, which was one of her favorite things to do. We used to garden together, which later made me buy my own allotment to grow vegetables and flowers. So I had owned said allotment for a couple of weeks when my grandmother came to visit me. She was so proud with what I had done to the place. And then she told me that she had cancer, and that she probably wouldn't survive long enough to see all the flowers in the garden blossom. Broke my heart. Within weeks, she was in intensive care, and I visited her in hospice just hours before she died. She was in a coma, and I begged her to let go, which she did. My family owns a house just by a fjord, a river. My grandparents also used to have a house there, so my grandmother had just wished to have her ashes spread over the water so she would still be close to us. I had picked her favorite flowers from my allotment as my last gift to her. I put the flowers in the water as well as a sip of beer, which she also enjoyed. 2 weeks later, I get a call from my mom. She just wanted me to know that 3 yellow flowers had appeared on their private pier overnight. The flowers are not indigenous to my country and actually quite rare to come across. They were just as fresh as if they had been cut. Needless to say, we were all shocked, mostly because only my mom and me knew those yellow flowers were a favorite. My dad and brothers would have never thought of it, let alone pulled a prank on us. As a reminder, I have one of those flowers tattooed on my arm. The new house I built on my allotment bears her name, and every spring I plant dozens of these bulbs in her memory. It could all mean a prank, but in my heart, I know it wasn't. She just wanted to let me know that she was still around. Something followed me from a psychiatric hospital. So I've been back and forth on whether or not to tell this story. Mostly because it involves some aspects of my working life that I'm not at liberty to discuss. But also because it had a severe personal implication for me. Anyway, I've decided to share it here, and I hope you understand why these things I simply can't go into detail about. This all started in December of 2020. As a part of my education, I was scheduled for a 6-month internship at a psychiatric hospital. I had previous experience with working with this type of patient, so I was really excited about it. I switched around 4 different wards in the hospital, so I treated a lot of different people with a lot of different problems. I was curious about all the different aspects, so I never said no to any task, which meant I came across everything from murderers, pedophiles, to suicidal teenagers with personality disorders. In my work life, I've had people spit at me, verbally and physically assault me, throw shit at me, and all that stuff. So I'd like to think I'm a pretty tough guy. Besides that, I always carried a personal assault alarm. One press of a button, staff from every ward would be there in a matter of seconds. On one of the wards, I quickly noticed that there was a certain room which was monitored 24/7 by a guard. To be clear, this is a pretty normal procedure, either because the patient is physically abusive, suicidal, or restrained. But most patients get the watch pulled off of them relatively quickly. I asked a colleague, and she told me that it was a female patient, let's just call her Anne, who's extremely aggressive and psychotic beyond belief. At that point, Anne had been restrained to her bed for 3 months. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. We have a really strict procedure when it comes to restraining people with belts. By the way, they're soft belts made of fabric, not leather. So restraining the patient really is absolutely last resort that we go to. I asked this cheap psychiatrist, what was up with this girl? And he just scuffed and said, if only I knew, but honestly, she defies logic. He told me that at first, they thought that she was psychotic, but her symptoms only got worse, no matter how much different medication they tried. Then they thought she might have suffered a trauma and was in a dissociative state, but that still didn't fit the profile of her symptoms. She had gone from being a perfectly normal woman in her 20s to being violent, extremely aggressive, and unable to speak in just 4 months. That is practically unheard of, especially as no drugs were involved. We regularly take a toxicology check of all patients and always when they're admitted. One day my alarm went off. They're all connected, so I know where I need to go to run to help my colleagues. I immediately knew it had to be Anne, and I was right. She had only had her legs and torso fixated. Again, normal procedure. The patient otherwise is relatively calm. She had defecated in her hand and thrown it at the guard watching her. She then proceeded to bite her fingers so hard that 3 or 4, I can't remember the exact number, had really bad fractures. Both her hands were a bloody mess, and she needed like 50 stitches afterwards. It wasn't the blood or the fact that she would throw her own shit at us. I had seen that loads of times, but the screams this woman made was the most primal, guttural, and terrifying sound I've ever heard. It scared me shitless. The best way I can describe it is something like a bear growling and a mountain lion hissing and spitting all at the same time. I've seen my fair share of people in primal distress, but I could have never imagined that a person could make a sound like that. As an intern, I am in no way allowed to use force, so I was just watching as 7 of my colleagues tried to fixate her to her bed. They had serious trouble pinning her down. Remind you that these are really experienced people. At last, we called a medicinal alarm, which immediately calls for a chief psychiatrist to make decisions. He decided to forcefully medicate her. They gave her 1 and then a 2nd shot. Only seemed to piss her off, even though it should have put a bear to sleep. At the 3rd injection, she calmed enough to where they could restrain her. She never nodded off. She just breathed heavily and kept staring up at the same corner of the room, sometimes smirking at something only she could see. Fast forward 2 weeks. I was back at the ward. It was relatively calm and on the weekend, so there really wasn't much to do. Anne was in one of the good periods, so she had had her restraints removed. A guard was always by her, though. I was sitting in the office when suddenly I see Anne walking in the hallway without the guard. I don't know if he had taken a bathroom break, whatever, but he wasn't around. So I caught up with her. I asked her what she was doing in the hallway alone, but of course she didn't respond. I should mention that many of my colleagues were afraid of Anne, and rightfully so, even though everyone is aware that it's the illness and not the person attacking you, but when it keeps happening, that patient does catch some stigma. I, for one, always try to look at the person and not the illness. So I asked where we were going. She took me by the arm and led me to the common area. She went over to a book cabinet, turned and looked at me, and muttered, "Read book." I was completely taken back by the fact that she was speaking. She pulled out a random book and handed it to me. Then she sat down on the floor and started rocking back and forth. I joined her on the floor and started reading the book. It was just some random old book, probably from a charity, and it had no special meaning. But as I read, she came closer and closer to me. Then she cuddled up on me, put her head on my lap, and fell asleep. One of my colleagues came by and she looked absolutely shocked. Before I knew it, 5 or 6 people, including the chief psychiatrist, was looking at me reading this random book out to her. I caught a lot of praise for this, which is actually nice. But then things took a turn for the worse, at least for me. It started one night when I was home alone. It was a completely normal night for me, until I heard something from upstairs coming down the stairs. The best way to describe it is like a big dog thrashing and tumbling down the stairs. You know, like when a dog rushes down the stairs to greet you. But this was bigger, much bigger. I could hear the weight of something tumbling down while nails or claws or whatever slid on the steps. I got up thinking that somehow there was a massive animal in my house. But there was nothing there. That scared the ever-living shit out of me. I had never had anything like that happen to me. I left the house and stayed the night with my parents. But I also had strange effects on my body. Like I had a filter over my eyes or something. Everything started to seem out of focus, like tunnel vision, but with a massive blur added to it. And then I started to disassociate. I had this feeling of being totally cut off from the contact of my body. Then came the panic attacks. My girlfriend called an ambulance one of the times because I was on the verge of a heart attack. The paramedic said I had a heart rate of 240. I've had no prior problems with my psyche, but I figure it was stress. I have suffered from sleep paralysis before, but never with hallucinations, or whatever you want to call it. But that started recently. I see a large black mass with long arms and legs sit in the right corner of our bedroom, like a massive spider, but just with 4 legs. This is now happening on a nightly basis. A couple of days ago, I told my girlfriend about it, because she kept pestering me with questions about my nightmares. She said, "That's funny. Every time you're about to go to sleep, you look up in that corner and you just sort of smirk." That reminded me of Anne. Now I'm absolutely terrified that I might have brought something home. Believe it or not, that's up to you. Never treated a patient like Anne. None of my colleagues had either. Scary stuff. I've never suffered from any psychological problems before, never. But something's going on, I'm sure of it. It feels like it wants to get back at me or something. I don't know. And by the way, Anne is much better today. She's in a rehabilitation home where she thrives. One day she might even be able to have a normal life. A bizarre taxi home. We were in Belfast, North Ireland. It was around 4:30. A group of friends and I had just left a party. And while they were all very much not sober, I'm straight edge, and I can recall this clearly. We tried calling for a taxi. However, there was an awkward number of us, so we couldn't get into one and have it carry all of us. So we decided to tramp home. It was about a 35-minute walk, so not that far. However, it had been a big session, and we were all pretty done, just moaned about not having a ride when a random old-fashioned black taxi, think like a London cab, pulled up alongside of us. These taxis usually hold 5 to 6 passengers max in the back section, but this had 9 seats, 1 for each of us. The door opened by itself, and everyone climbed in without even saying a word and proceeded to drive us to our destination. I didn't think anything of it at the time, but we all spent the whole ride in silence. The cab smelled so bad that I didn't even want to breathe, and the interior was old and very dirty, with the floor even having a few small holes. Looking into the driver's cab, the driver was a very old man, looked to be 70 years old maybe, wearing an old tattered suit with an old newsboy cap on his head. But weirder still, a man in his late 20s was sat in his passenger seat, wearing ripped and dirty sweatpants and a dirty jumpsuit with stains all over it. Neither of these guys spoke the entire trip to each other or to any of us. It was just silence the whole way. Not even the radio was on. When we arrived at our destination, I herded my intoxicated group of friends out of the taxi, and when I turned to pay the fare, the taxi was gone and the road was completely clear in both directions. We all got into my friend's house and nobody spoke a word of what happened until the next day when the most wasted of the group told us about the trip that he had the night before. I'm not sure what the hell happened that night. All I know is that we were a group of Catholics in a Protestant part of town, and getting into a random car. It's the dumbest shit I've ever done. Somehow, even though it stank, it was clearly wrong in every way. It felt like it was exactly what I should have done at the time. Negative entity taking the form of my father. For some backstory, I was very interested in the paranormal from a young age. My father and my brothers told me of an encounter that they had while staying at a hotel in London, and that was enough for me to believe in something being out there. When I was in middle school, I was allowed to have sleepovers at my best friend's home, and she warned me about the hauntings that she experienced overnight. I saw shadow figures, watched doors open, heard footsteps, and many more things at that house. I have a very distinct memory of sleeping over one night, waking up at exactly 3 a.m., watching the bedroom door open, and feeling something coming toward me. I doubt this is related to the encounter I'm about to explain, but I'm including in case anybody may think it's due to the severity of the experiences that I'd had in that house. After having experienced those things, I woke up one night at 3 a.m. in my own home, rolled over in my bed, and saw a very clear figure of a man looking out my bedroom window. It looked to me just like my dad, who was still very much alive and was sleeping down the hall. So I said out loud, "Dad, what are you doing?" The figure turned to look at me, in which I was able to see it. It did in fact look exactly like my father. However, I knew it was not him. It looked back at the window. So I closed my eyes for a minute, and when I opened them, the figure was gone. I know I wasn't dreaming, because when I opened my eyes, I also dropped my iPod on the ground. And when I woke up the next morning, it was on the ground in the exact position I dropped it. Also, to be sure, I asked my father if he came to check on me during the night, and he assured me that he did not. Really, what I'm getting at here is, I'm wondering if anybody has an idea of what type of spirit or entity would appear this way. I've read about negative spirits appearing as people you know, or somebody that looks less threatening. And I'm even thinking that maybe something followed me home from my friend's home. I lived in that house for another 10 years or so and never had another encounter there. I'd love to hear what anybody else thinks about this. Are you seeing what I'm seeing? Before we moved out together, I would stay at his place until around 1 a.m., and I would park my car sideways at the very top of the gravel driveway, making a T. In the gravel driveway, there were always 2 cars parked, and the one closest to my car would be one that his brother had been working on for a while but didn't drive. Anyways, one night I was about to head to my car, and usually I don't mind walking up there alone, but that night, my fiancé said that he wanted to walk with me because it was a pretty night. While we were passing his brother's car on his left, we heard a little bang. Don't exactly know what it could have been. We both looked over and I immediately saw it looked to be someone ducked behind the car, with its head just a little bit up where we could see his eyes looking at us. With it being dark, I was questioning if I was seeing what I thought. So I looked over at my fiancé and saw him staring in that direction as well. He apparently thought that maybe it was his neighbor, which was our age, and we knew him pretty well. Just maybe he was messing with us, so he called out his name. Right as he did, the head ducked out of sight. My fiancé, knowing I had to get home and us both being confused, put me behind him and walked to the driver's side of my car, which is on the other side of his brother's car, where we saw the person. We were both expecting someone to be there, but once we got to that side, no one was there. We were both so confused, like we should have heard the gravel if they moved. Where could they have moved? The car was too low to the ground to get under it. There wasn't anything else nearby for them to hide behind. And again, how did we not hear the gravel move if they moved? Obviously, it could have been someone just trying to steal tools out of his brother's car, but all of it was still weird. He couldn't explain how it just disappeared. Anyways, he never let me walk up to the driveway at night by myself after that. It didn't have a mouth. This happened in September of 2020 in Aiken, South Carolina. I didn't grow up there, and we only ever lived there for about 6 months, so I'm not too familiar with the area. Some of these details are pretty boring, but I think it helps explain the setting and the situation better, so I'm going to give them regardless. My fiancé, G, had reconnected with an old family friend from high school, B, and we decided to rent his basement, which was renovated into a separate apartment while we looked for a place of our own. The house is not in a neighborhood, it's pretty rural in the area, in my opinion. We kind of had neighbors, but each house had several acres of land separating them. B had 2 large adult dogs, probably 55 to 65 pounds, and our dog was a little smaller than them at the time. The dogs would run around and play in the woods at the edge of the backyard. Everything was good for the first few weeks. Then, at night, we started feeling very unnerved if we had to go outside. I know it sounds so cliche, but it felt like something was standing in the woods staring at us. If we went somewhere after dark, we would do a speed walk, almost run from where we parked out in front all the way around the side of the house to the backyard, which is where our entrance was. Then we started hearing it, quote unquote. As I mentioned earlier, the dogs ran and played in the woods, so we were very aware of what it sounded like when a 60-pound creature was rambling around in the woods. This was much larger, so much bigger. It wasn't just the 3 of us hyping each other up to be scared either. Anyone that came to hang out, there was a pool in the backyard, so we had a fair amount of visitors, would hear it, and no one ever stayed outside after sunset. We thought it was a bear, to be honest, because whatever was making the noise was huge, much larger than a person, so a bear is the only thing that really fits in our minds. A few months go by, and we find our own place, and we were in the process of moving out when this occurred. My fiancé was up at the car, arranging the boxes so that we could maximize the space that we had available. I had just carried a box up to him and was walking back around the side of the house, from the front to the backyard, and it was sloped downhill a little bit. As I was walking down to go around from the side and back up to the house, I saw it, staring dead at me, straight into my eyes. Pretty sure my heart stopped beating for a few seconds. I completely froze up. Some instinct inside of me made me begin walking again. I felt like I shouldn't run, but try to act normal and get my ass inside. As soon as I got inside, I shut and locked the door, but immediately had to unlock it to open it back up because I couldn't lock my fiancé outside with this thing. I immediately started seeing these gruesome, gory pictures in my head. Pictures of me and my fiancé, beheaded, completely mangled and broken, laying on the floor of our apartment with everything that was left in the apartment smashed on the ground around us. Then right after that, something like, no, that's not what it will do. My fear of the unknown is making me unreasonable. If I let it in, it won't be like that. I kept having the weirdest urge to basically invite it in, which is absurd because the door was cracked open. Honestly, even if it had been shut and deadbolted, if that thing wanted in, I'm pretty sure it would have gotten in. I was torn. I wanted to call out to my fiancé, but I didn't want to startle this thing by yelling. And I didn't want my fiancé to come rushing down the door and have that thing spring on him and attack him. Finally, I couldn't take it and I yanked the door open. I was planning on running to the car, but my fiancé was right there and he had seen the thing too, and he had been watching it watch us. The second it turned and disappeared into the woods, he rushed down to the door. This thing was super tall, super skinny, and a sickly shade of whitish gray. It had brightly lit up glowing eyes. One very crazy detail, that I swear the eyes were a golden color. My fiancé swears that they were red. I don't understand any of this, but especially that part. The worst part of its appearance, however, was that it didn't have a mouth. Besides its bright eyes, the rest of its face was just skin. Tightly stretched, but perfectly smoothed out skin on its face. WTF. I had never in my life felt such a shock, like just a feeling in my heart that something was so wrong, as I did when I saw that thing looking into my eyes with its smoothed out skin where it should have a mouth. How do you eat if you have no mouth? How do you stay alive if you can't eat? Sometimes I worry that I honestly had the chance to meet and interact with a completely different species, and I blew it by being judgmental and fearful. This thing wasn't like me, so I was deathly afraid of it. Did I have a reason to be afraid? If I had wanted to hurt us 100% positive it could have. My fiancé said that he could feel the evil radiating off of it. And I need to quit beating myself up because it did not have friendly intentions. I know that this sounds so totally and utterly fake that it's absurd. I wouldn't believe this if somebody else posted it. I'm just wondering if anyone else has ever seen anything like this. And if they have, maybe they can tell me what the fuck this thing is. For months after it happened, I wouldn't talk about it. Anytime my fiancé brought it up, I would shut the conversation down. I didn't want to even think about it. Because I was scared that it would just feel me thinking of it somehow and would come back and find me again. We don't live near there anymore. And now that I know that there's an irrational fear anyways, I've never told anybody about it, and neither has my fiancé. I couldn't bear to spill my guts to someone I'm close to about the situation that was so intensely terrifying and borderline traumatic. I know that seems so drama queenish, but it's legit the most fearful experience of my life. And have them look in my eyes and not believe me, it would destroy my relationship with the person, and I don't want that to happen. I don't have many people that I'm close to. I would just prefer to keep them. Thanks for reading, and if you have any ideas what this thing is, please let me know. ETA. I talked to my fiancé this morning regarding this whole experience. Usually he brings it up and I shut the conversation down immediately. This is the second real conversation, and in my opinion, more than a few sentences, that we've had about it. He told me that he didn't see red eyes, that they were a bright white light bulb. But to me, they weren't white. That makes more sense, though. They're two completely different colors. We were in two different elevations and also different distances from it. So maybe the light was reflecting strangely. And maybe we just weren't paying too much Maybe we just weren't paying too much attention at its eye color because we were trying to figure out what the hell we were looking at. Also, we were in North Augusta, SC. The road we lived off of was Old Aiken Road. I guess that's why I mistakenly said it happened in Aiken. Seance gone wrong. When I, female, was 12 years old, my twin and I were super into ghosts and would watch ghost shows on TV all the time. One thing that we watched was a segment where they'd take a cup, turn it so it would bottom up. Everyone in the circle would put their finger on it. They called this a seance, and they'd ask yes or no questions, and if the cup moved, that it was supposed to mean yes. So obviously my siblings and I had to try this. One summer day while our parents were gone, my twin, a 12-year-old female, and my stepbrother, 10-year-old male, dragged the coffee table into our bedroom and closed the door. We had the cup, and we all put our pointer finger on the cup and started asking if anything was there. At first we could tell stepbro was messing with us and trying to move it without us noticing, so we told him that he wasn't going to take it seriously, to just leave. My twin and I stayed seated. The stepbro goes to leave, but right as his hand touches the door handle, the cup started moving in a clockwise fashion, sort of slowly. Of course, I'm not moving it. I ask my twin if she's moving it, and she says no and is looking a little bit worried. Stepbro is watching from the door, and the cup starts moving a bit faster. I take my finger off the cup and go towards stepbro, watching in horror as the cup continues to move faster and faster. Bless my twin, because she held on a bit longer. But eventually the cup was moving so fast her hand wouldn't stay on, even if she had wanted it to be there. The three of us run screaming out of that room. The cup is still moving and no one's touching it anymore. I have no explanation for what happened. All of us ran screaming from that room, and the cup eventually ended up on the floor. Honestly, I have no idea how it flew off. Because I was gone. Still one of the most bizarre things I've ever experienced. Is my home haunted? Alright, so this happened around 6 months ago or so. I live with my grandma, and sometimes she leaves days on end to visit her sister, and leaves me home alone. Now this house is old, and we live in a forested area. Weird noises and all that fun stuff occur all the time. However, this was different. One of the days my grandmother was gone, I was awoken at 3 a.m. I know it was 3, and I know I was awake because I checked my phone to see the time. What woke me up was what I heard. It was my front door opening, which was odd to me because my grandma hates driving at night, but I still assumed that my grandma was home. I turned off my phone and rolled on my bed to face the bedroom door. I hear some creaks, and this is when shit gets weird. I don't know if I just fell asleep really quick or if this shit actually happened, but as I was looking at my door, with my head under the pillow, I saw what appeared to have been my door open with a hand dangling by my room light. I once again just assumed that this was my grandma and went back to sleep. In the morning I woke up, called for my grandma just to find out that she never came home. Now this is when I had a small freak out because I was awakened by my front door opening. Yeah, I locked all the doors. This was day 1. Day 2 of my grandma being gone was my small freak-out day. I double-checked everything. My front door was locked, my back door was locked. Everything was just the way I left it. My day went on normally. When nighttime hit, the entire time I just had this feeling I was being watched, observed. I closed the blinds to my house and essentially locked myself in my room. I was watching some Star Trek with my window open and heard branches and leaves crack outside. Living in a forested area, I assumed it was a deer or rabbit, so I gave it a quick glance. Opened my bedroom blinds, a small amount. And well, it obviously was dark, but I saw nothing. Nothing that could have made a sound of branches breaking like that right out by my window. Nothing creepy happened that night, but I still felt uneasy. When my grandma finally comes home, everything went back to normal. No more uneasy feeling, or feeling of being watched. However, now whenever she leaves for multiple days, it does come back.